Let's begin our meeting. First item on our agenda this morning is an information item to review the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions, comments, proposed substitutions or changes to the consent agenda? Hearing none, we will move into our Academic, Student, and External Affairs Committee meeting. Chairman Ponder.
Chairman Downey. This is a day when we'll have a couple of information items. As a matter of fact, 3 information items for this committee. The first information item will be a presentation on financial aid report that Executive Vice President Foley will give for us, and then Hank will lead us to a demonstration of the strategic plan dashboard. After that, when Hank finishes, we'll have Vice President Steve Knorr give the university relations report. And with that introduction, if Hank, you'd come up.
Okay. Good morning. Thanks very much. Good to be here. I should point out that next week will be the 6-month mark for me, and it's been a terrific 6 months. And just wanted to start on a happy note before I go into the financial aid report. But just kidding, it's been terrific, and I really appreciate it. So this morning, what I wanted to do is to give you some context and perspective on the financial aid report. You've seen this report in the past. I think in the past, Nikki Kravitz has done this for you. This year I will be doing it, and presumably in the ensuing years as well. So let's begin with some context. The context I'd like to provide you with first is the number of students who are graduating from high schools in the state of Missouri. And this shows that number as a function of time. And you can see on the far right-hand side that we're now up to about 70,000 students, and we're kind of hitting a plateau at that point, and it's anticipated that the numbers will stay in this or near this value year over year from now on, and may bounce around that value. If we look at the percent of high school graduates who are going on to college, and by college we mean technical school, 2-year schools, 4-year schools, public, private, and so forth, you see that number is about 60%. So about 42,000 of our students are going on to college. Now it's interesting, of those 42,000, about 11,000 go out of state and about 33,000 stay in state. And that's across all different kinds of education beyond high school. So keep that in mind as well as we go through this. This is a way of looking at the marketplace, if you will, for higher education across the state in terms of the University of Missouri system. So on the far left-hand side, you see that from 2000 to 2010, we've been at about 8 to 9% of all Missouri high school graduates, all 70,000, about 9% of those come to the University of Missouri system, or about 6,300. If you do the math from there on, you can see the rest of the numbers. If we look at just the in-state cohort, which is 33,000, then that's about 20% of those students come to the University of Missouri right now. If we compare that to all public institutions, which includes 2-year and 4-year institutions, it's somewhere around 23 to 25% of that group. If we do it on the basis of 4-year institutions, public and private, we're at about 30%. And if we trim it down to just those students who are going to in-state public 4-year universities, we're at about 40 to 42%. And that number has continued to grow over the last few years. Again, if we sort of take it from not from the front end of the process, but at the end of the pipe, speaking as a chemical engineer, and we look at the awards that are granted, the undergraduate degrees that are granted, I should say, all awards, all institutions were about 16% of production. Undergraduate awards at all institutions, somewhere around 14 or 15%. Undergraduate awards at public institutions, on the order of 30% of those undergraduate awards at all 4-year institutions, including private schools, about 20%, and of the undergraduate awards at public 4-year institutions were just under 50%. So that gives you some sense of those numbers as a background for that which we'll talk about now, which is really the financial aid piece of this. I should just add one more piece, and that is if we compare the University of Missouri system to other leading state schools and systems in our region, you see those numbers here. Interestingly, the University of Illinois system is at about, I think that's around 3.5 or 4% of high school graduates that are on their way to college. Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas. You could see we're in the middle when we add the 4 schools together. If we look at Oklahoma, they're a little higher. Kansas, Kansas State, and Kansas together at about 16%. So we're in the middle, and we seem to be doing fairly well. But it also suggests that there's opportunity in this market for us to do even better going into the future. Now, part of that comes down to financial aid. So I'm shifting gears now, and I'm going to talk about our numbers. Keep in mind that these numbers are really based on federal standards and regulations. And if you'd like to talk about that later, I could point you to websites that explain this and so forth. But here's how it usually breaks down. The first thing we look at is the budgeted cost of attendance. Let's say that's $22,827. Then there's a somewhat complicated formula at the federal level that calculates the expected family contribution, often referred to simply as EFC. In this particular case, we've shown that as $4,480. Hence, the financial need that this student would have would be about $18,300. Grant aid is gift money, if you will, that could come from federal and state and institutional sources. In this particular case, we've shown it as 5453. That would mean this particular student had a remaining need of just under $13,000. Some students choose to work. Work study is a small but important component of that which fills the remaining need. Need-based loans are given at all levels. You can see that here. Less non-need-based loans. And the unmet financial need in a case like this would be about $7,800, which the student would then have to come up with by other means. So that's an example of how these sorts of calculations are done. Now let's take a look at where the sources are for some of those dollars. We're going to be comparing FY09 to fiscal year 13, looking at state aid, federal aid, and institutional aid. At the federal level, you could see that in 09, we brought in about $409 million, which turns out to be 56% of the total. So the federal component of this is always the most significant component. In 13, that had gone up significantly by 27% to just under $520 million. Now, at the state level, aid that's given, we know the various programs that are out there. In 09 was about $24 million. That fell to $18.6 million in 13, or dropped by about a quarter. It went from 3% to 2%, so it's still the smallest fraction by far. Institutional money is shown on the next line. In 09, that was $242 million, or about a third of the total. In 13, it was still about a third of the total, but it had risen by almost 20% to make up the difference. And then there are many other sorts of programs out there, including endowment funds and the like, that could come from private organizations and so forth. That was about $53 million in 09, dropped to about $50 million in 13. So there's the total, about 728. We're up to about 876 after 4 years. So there's been some change. Yes, Curator Good.
On the institutional, how much of that is from established scholarships that come from everywhere, and how much of it is additional university money that's put in out of just the university's budget?
Out of the university's budget. So that number we'll touch on, but the significant fraction, I can't give you the exact number here off the top of my head, but the greater portion of it is in fact from GO funds. Would you agree with that, Ken?
Out of that total dollar?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is. Do we have, Steve, Graham, do we have a number on that you could give the curator? Yeah, let's get that number so that we have it. So we're talking about endowment, endowment versus GO monies. I think well, we could almost do the calculation on our feet, right? But let's not do that for fear of getting it wrong. Let's move on then. If we look at student loans, which of course are on all of our minds these days, they still comprise over 50% of all financial aid given to undergraduates. So you can see here that in 2009 in the system, we had about $175 million in grants and about $245 million in loans, and about a tenth of that, or $27 million, in various employment opportunities. By 2013, grants had grown significantly by almost 30% to 225. Loans, however, had also grown. So they maintain over 50%, at an over 50% level, to just under $300 million. And employment had grown as well to just under $50 million.
May I ask about employment? Is that work-study employment?
There's work-study involved in that, yes.
We don't capture other things that aren't university-related work-study.
If it's university-related, we catch it. If they're out working at Starbucks, we don't catch it, obviously. Let's move on then and look at total dollars to undergraduate students receiving financial aid from institutional sources. Now I'm just looking at institutional sources. I'm leaving aside state, I'm leaving aside federal, and there are three areas, and this is where it gets a little bit dicey, you have to understand. We have need-based, we have merit, and then we have another category that's called non-need-based. And you could see those numbers here. So need-based is calculated by that federal formula that I showed you before. We look at the EFC, we look at the total cost of attendance, take the difference between the two, and that's the need. The merit-based scholarships are just anything out there that may be on the basis of ACT scores, that may be coming from endowments, that may be coming from a variety of other sources. The non-need-based is, frankly, everything else, right? So if we look at these dollars, what we see in 2009 is that need-based was about 12%, merit was 46%, non-need-based was 42%, total of $120 million. Again, just within the institution, we're looking at $350 million more if we bring in financial resources from the Fed. So this is just essentially the money that we have to allocate. By 2013, the need-based was about $16.6 million, about 10%. The merit-based, $75 million, and the non-need-based was $78.7 million. So you can see it's, again, about 10% need-based, 4% merit, and about 46% non-need-based. It takes a little while to get one's head around these numbers and what they mean. But what I should also point out here is that in almost all cases where there is need, non-need-based aid and where possible merit-based aid is also used to fill that gap. So let's go on. Any questions on that? So how do the campuses approach it? All of them use federal definition of need. Just to summarize that, it's the cost of education minus the expected family income. That gives us the need-based aid. All students have to complete these forms to be eligible for need. The neediest students receive the greater amounts of gift aid and a combination of need-based and non-need-based employment opportunities. Students with low need or no need at all are usually only offered loans. So let's look at how financial need has changed over the last 4 years, and it's really quite a story. The red line is aid recipients with need. The blue line is aid recipients with no need, and those who are on the green line pay the full freight, if you will. Full pay, no aid. And you can see that here, from 2009 to 2013, in the system, we've gone from just under 15,000 students who are recipients with need to over 18,000 students of students in that category. That's about a 24% increase in the number of students. This is actually a good news story, if you think about it, because it means then that the University of Missouri is, in fact, accessible and is keeping the doors wide open and is broadening them. So this is something to think about. For non-residents, that was residents, I should have pointed that out, In the red, we have aid recipients, again, with need. That's grown from 1,650 to almost 3,000 students in 2013. Those students who are pulling full freight are up to about 2,228, just under 2,300 students from out of state. But the biggest growth, obviously, has been in those students who come from out of state who have financial need.
Dr. Foley, are
Yes.
these FTEs?
Is it FTE or head count, you mean?
Yeah.
I think it's FTE, but I have to check on that. Is there a good?
Well, the numbers didn't seem to add up to the total enrollment, so.
Yeah, I think it's FTEs. That's why.
Blue,
Sorry?
blue line is students with academic scholarships.
They could be, but they don't have need. That's right.
What's the difference between full paid, no aid, the green line and the blue line?
Just what you said. Yeah,
Okay, so
just
blue
what you
has
said.
got academic scholarships.
Some sort of scholarships, yeah. Work, loans, could be other things, right? But there are, yeah. Good. Now, let's look at the gap between budgeted cost of attendance and average aid for residents. Again, these are average numbers. So in 09, our budgeted cost of attendance was about $21,300. In 13, it was just under $23,000. The percent change of those 4 years is actually just 7.2%. The average grant aid went from about $4,078 up to about $4,400 for those students, leaving a gap in 09 of about 17,000, which has grown now to over 18,000, or gone up by about 7% over that period of time. Tuition, if we do it on the basis not of budgeted cost of attendance, but in the second part of the slide, just on the basis of tuition and required fees, you can see that the gap has grown from about $4,300 to $4,800, or about 11.5%. So what it's saying is the top numbers are kind of conditioned by the cost of attendance, including room and board, which is going up at a slower pace than tuition and fees. All right, another complicated slide, which I need to break down for you, but gives you lots of information. So let's look at unmet need again from 09 to 13 by income level for residents. So now we're going to look at family income, and if I could point to the slide, I will. I know for those of you who are looking that way, I can't do much for you, but maybe I could point here. Let's do it this way. So, okay, this band is for those families that are making less than $20,000 a year. This is 09, this is 13. The blue part of this bar is the grant aid, which in a sense is gift money, if you will. The non-grant aid, which is loans and employment, and then the yellow bar is the unmet need. We do this as a function, if you will, of income level, so we go from 20 to 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 100, and 100,000. And what do we see? Obviously, what we see is that the yellow bar, which is the unmet need that students have to come up with from some other means, is very high and has remained high for students who are in the neediest category. For students who are in the $20,000 to $40,000 category, again, the same has been true. But what's very interesting, and we see this happening across the nation, is for those students who come from families of little more means, who are quote-unquote middle-class families, that unmet need bar has actually grown faster for them. So the yellow bar is larger in 13, the yellow portion of the bar is larger in 13 for families that are between, let's say, $40,000 and $100,000. For those folks, particularly in that $60,000 to $100,000 category, if their students are not outstanding academically, they really pay the most, right? They're the ones who really hit the hardest. And then obviously for those folks who are above that, things have gotten a little harder, but the unmet need is much smaller. All right? So this is what we're dealing with. This is what our registrars and people who are bringing folks in and recruiting are dealing with day in and day out in our financial aid area. Yes,
I just want
Amy.
to echo that. The
Yeah.
number one, I don't know if I want to call it a complaint that I get from students is I turn in my FAFSA. My parents make too much money to qualify for financial aid, but not enough for anything else.
So I'll go back again. Yeah, exactly, Amy. So what you're seeing is everyone's getting pushed to the same unmet need kind of category. And so that's where folks scramble, borrow, do other things to try to make it happen. Okay. For non-resident, I won't go through this, essentially the same story. All right, now, that all looks a little scary, and I admit that, but I wanted to end on a little happier note, because I think, to the credit of the University of Missouri system and its campuses, some really terrific things have happened in spite of the fact that these are very difficult times. And I hope that you could see the colors here. They look very good on this particular screen. So what we've shown you here are several bars. Let's start with the rightmost orange bar in 0506. That's the bar corresponding to the percent of Missouri high school graduates who are in the low-income category. Their families and they are in that category. In 06, it was about 40%. In 010-11, it was up over 45%. Right? So there was growth in that category. If we now look at the left-hand-most bar, that is students who are Pell eligible entering MU. And you can see that that was about 12% in 05-06, but it was over 20% in 10-11, I'm sorry. If we look at UMKC, the number is really good. It was at 30%, and it's gone even better at UMKC. It's now up to 40%. At S&T, the number was at 15. It's now up to 25%. At UMSL, the number was around 26. It's now over 40% of the students who are entering. So if we look at the system as a whole, which is the light blue bar, we see that whereas we were at 15% before, as a system now, we're over 25%. Access is there. People are coming. We are finding ways, and they are finding ways working with us to make it work. What I think is also a story worth telling is the number of students in our classes who are underrepresented minorities coming from high schools. So if you look at recent high school graduates again, first, go to 05-06 for me. If we look at the orange bar, that is the percentage of students who are underrepresented minorities across the state graduating from high school. That number was about 16%. It's gone up in the 5-year period to just under 20%. Again, if we look at the numbers here, it's a good news story in many, many ways. Whereas MU was at 10% in 05, it's up to 15% in 2010. And whereas UMKC was already at 26%, it's up closer to 30% now. If we look at S&T, it's at 10% in 05. It's grown to probably about 12% in 10-11. Again, if we look at St. Louis, we see tremendous accessibility and growth in the number of underrepresented minority students from about 21% to almost 26 or 27%. So let's focus on the last two bars, and that is the light blue bar in 05 is at about, I'd say, 13%. Across the state, underrepresented minority students are about 16%. That's about a 3% gap. If we look at 10-11, the gap has closed. We're now at, I would say, about 16.5%, and those students who are in these categories are at about 17 or 18% in rough numbers. So what we're trying to do over time is to get that blue bar to match that orange bar. And I would say we're moving in that direction. Curator Good.
Hank, on one or two slides back, the one
Yes.
that showed unmet need.
This one?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, those with the larger amounts of unmet need are not students because they couldn't meet that need, or
No,
are students, and how was the need met even though it shows as
Yeah.
unmet need.
So it's unmet need from the programs that I've described to you. So they have to go to the bank, they have to go to their grandmother, they have to go work more, they have to borrow in other ways. These are for undergraduates,
So they
curator
have
good.
to
So they are in school.
get that amount, they have to get somewhere that's unrelated to the university.
It's not federal, it's not institutional, it's not a state program. That's right. And that's where the rub is.
Yeah.
But they are finding their way there. And so even though, we wish that number were much, much smaller, they're finding ways to do it. And remember, this is cost of attendance. And we have to remember that, whether a person comes to college or a university or not, there is a cost of living. And our cost of attendance includes room and board. And so if you take that out and sort of think about it, it's not as bad as it looks. You have to pay for that to stay alive anyway. So this is actually, I think, not a bad story, but I wouldn't want to tell everyone it's a great story because we've got more work to do. But I think the University of Missouri system can be very proud of the direction in which these numbers are going. So overall key points. Two-year public universities clearly capture the majority of first-time college students. That means that's a source for us, right? We have to always look at that and say, if that's true, then we want to capture more of those students coming out after their second year into our system universities. UM's market share is dominant among public four-years, but there's no reason why it can't go up. It can go up, and we could do even better. We could do better in a lot of ways, and I think if we do that, it's good for the system, but it's also good for the state. Compared to flagship institutions in nearby states, does fairly well in attracting research high school graduates. Again, I showed you we're about in the middle. UM's share of Missouri first-time college students is about 14% of the state total, while the public two-year share, again, is about 55%. So if we're going to think like business people for a minute, those are the things we've got to focus on, right? We've got to find more ways to fill that unmet need, and we've got to find more ways to capture students who are coming out of these other programs and bring them up to speed quickly at the university level. Summary. Enrollments at the University of Missouri continue to increase. Financial aid trends indicate that students with financial need continue to receive access to the university. There's growth in all of those categories. And lower income undergraduates continue to have the largest amount of unmet financial need. They do, in fact, continue to take out the largest loans, but they also receive the largest grant and aid awards. So going back to what we were talking about all day yesterday, development, 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 that's the source of revenue that we need to fill that unmet need. And I'll leave it with that. Thank you. Questions?
I've got a question on the share of first-time college students and also so 55% of the first-time college students essentially go to the 2 years.
That's right. That's correct. And remember, I think in Missouri you could go there for virtually nothing, right, to the first 2 years. Yep.
The 14%, our share of the first-time college students, does that include those that go to the 2 years and then transfer
No,
to our system?
the first-time college students. So it's the first time they step on a campus.
Do we have any idea of the first-time college students that go to the 2 years and then transfer to one of our schools?
That is a great question, which I don't have at the tip of my tongue. Steve, anyone back there? I feel like stump the jump, but I don't have that one. I know at St. Louis, Tom, Glenn has told me that the number of students coming in every year, the greater proportion, in fact, are not FTCs, but are coming from 2 years. So in your entering class, 75%.
Are transfers.
Right. Ken, do you know at MU?
Well, most of ours are first-time students.
That's what I thought. What about about half at Kansas City? So where am I? Where's Cheryl? Cheryl, I think you're probably mostly FTCs. So again, if you look at the system, it's very interesting, right? So our two biggest population centers, St. Louis and Kansas City, we are providing enormously high access to FTCs, but also to students coming out of two-year colleges. And I think that's something we could be proud of. On the other hand, we need more money to make sure those kids graduate, right? So that the graduation rates at UMSL in Kansas City go up. Chancellor Morton, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think I mentioned before that about 3 years ago, our six-year graduation rate was about 43%. It's now, we just hit 50% this year, so it's a 7-point increase in 3 years. But that was because, the curators invested in our Atterbury Student Success Center, and we've had a real focus on retention. Fastest way to grow is keep the students you have.
Exactly. Chancellor George, comment on that?
I'll agree to that, and our six-year graduation rates are going up. I think not quite as high as 50%, but we have a similar operation too, which looks like student success.
So speaking qualitatively, not quantitatively right now, I know also one of the problems both at UMKC and UMSL is that students who do go to two-year schools first sometimes do use up their available aid. And so what happens, unfortunately, is they get to a certain point, 80% finished, 85% finished towards their degree, and they're out of money, right? And then their unmet need is the whole boat load. And that's the part which is really a shame. So a couple things there. One is if we could get more information out to those young people to keep that in mind. Don't buy a car with your student loan, right? That sort of thing. You don't need it. Take the bus. We could, in fact, I think, retain more kids. But, of course, if we had to add funding and do development work, I think that would be very near the top of the list. Yes, Tim.
Let me just make a comment. The large proportion of high school graduates going to 2 years, 55%. The financial incentive from the state that is only available to 2 years, which is the A+ program, to Hank's point, almost makes it free, and that is in many cases the right choice for some high school students, especially if they need to take some classes to remediate math challenges or English or writing classes. But there's a lot of students out there that have the academic qualifications to be on a 4-year program. But if that financial incentive was available for those high school students to go to a 4-year, they would be going to a 4-year school. So we, from a state scholarship standpoint, very much motivate students to go to a 2-year program with A+.
I agree. Good. Yes.
One of the early slides had a category of, I think the first one was needs-based, the second one was merit, and then the third one was non-needs-based student aid. Not today, but at some point, we might be interested in seeing a further breakdown of the non-needs-based student aid. Mm-hmm. I think the categories included athletic,
correct,
loans, but loans are really just kicking it down the road.
Correct.
So I'd be interested in seeing.
I can do that for you, and I think it's going to be mostly loans. Bit of work, and we don't have that many athletes. So if we aggregate those, I can almost right now tell you what the answer will be, but I'd be happy to do that for you.
You've given me the answer to the question I was looking for,
probably,
which really just means that through the university, we're giving families access to loans. If we can't get it through the university, then they're going to have to go to the bank or some other organization. So it really is a different, lower level of student aid.
That's right, and savings, right? So savings are in there as well, but savings are low across the country, as we know. So thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I will stop with this. Are there any other?
Any other questions?
Chairman Downing? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Should we go to the next element?
Sir.
Is that the dashboard, I believe?
Dashboard.
Okay, if I could ask Jenna Moore to come to the front of the room, please. Yes.
Mike,
I'm sorry.
can I ask Tim a question?
Sure.
I understand that situation with the community colleges and so forth.
I do. I believe, and we've had conversations about that, is expanding the A+ for, to be utilized by 4 years for certain institutions and certain classes is the conversation that's occurring. It's premature right now. It's not going to happen this session, but we are working towards having more flexibility for a student to use A+ dollars towards their college degree.
So I think it's a situation we're kind of torn over. It's good to have some place for every student to go, that's community college. On the other hand, you know, we want our share of qualified students to come to us.
Correct.
So it's kind of, with X amount of money, where does the money go and how do those priorities, you know, work out? Not our priorities so
Yeah.
much, but from the state aspect.
Agreed, and I tried to preface my comments, maybe it wasn't as clear as possible. 2 years serve a very, very important role, and a lot of students should be going to 2 years, but there's some that have the academic qualifications and the passion to go on to a 4-year, because that's where they want to end up, and they don't need to take calculus or algebra because they've already gotten AP credits for that, but they end up going to the 2-year because the financial incentive is too much to pass up. So if that financial incentive could be used to go to a 4-year, then they're there a little bit quicker, they can get into the swing of things and really focus on their degree program. That's my
Almost
suggestion.
needs to be adding to the latter without taking away from the front end of it that address so many students.
Yeah, I think trying to put more of the flexibility in the hands of the student in terms of what's the right choice. Just because I come from an A+ school and I want to go on to college, why am I restricted to only using these dollars that are generously made available to me as a student by taxpayers? Why am I forced to go to a 2-year school when I want to go to a 4-year school? We're forcing them to do that based on that incentive.
Correct.
One thing that I think that we discount is with the A+ program, and there's a very active A+ program in Cassville, is it's not as much the tuition, it's they live at home. And that's what makes the A+ program work in our community, is they can live at home, they can keep the job they had in high school, they can, and school is free, while even if they had the A+ money, I'm not sure that these kids would come to a 4-year because of the cost of living, cost of housing, et cetera.
So, Don, they did an analysis on A+. That's a great reason and purpose for A+, to save up the monies to go to 4 years, stay at home, keep your job. But they did an analysis of the A+ dollars, and they found out that the majority of the A+ dollars are used by people that don't have financial need. So the majority of the people that take advantage of A+ do not have financial need. Financial need is defined by that FAFSA calculation.
It's very surprising.
It is. It is. There are a lot of things that need to be sorted out there. I also point back to the 2 chancellors at KC and St. Louis, because I've heard a number of times on their campus the point made that students will somewhat frivolously in their first 2 years out of high school use their student loans for things that really aren't educational. Then they get to the next level and they just, as I said before, run out of money. So we need to have perhaps more counseling on these things in high school so that people are really much more serious and quite rigorous about how they use these programs. Yeah.
And one last thing, I was reminded by Chancellor Morton that he'd be happy to have his students live at home, keep their job and go to UMKC. I'm sure Chancellor George would do the same thing, but unfortunately we don't have a school in Cassville, but we're working on it.
UMKC branch in Cassville,
It's not that far a drive.
Well, that's what e-learning is all about, so we'll be there soon enough. All right, with that happy note, I'm going to turn the subject a bit to a different area, and that is, as you know, President Wolf has put in place a pretty rigorous strategic planning process, which we've been following to a T. You also know that as part of that program, he expected us to be held accountable and to hold ourselves accountable publicly. And we also know that the governor has put out performance metrics for us that we will be held accountable to as well. So with all of that in mind, if you remember the way the strategic plans are constructed, we have a strategy, we have themes, we have levers, and we have actions. Then we have best-in-class metrics, we have accountability metrics, and we have strategic metrics. All of those things come together and are something that we want to follow, and the president wants to follow pretty closely, and we want each of the chancellors to follow as well. We'd also like you to have access to that as well as the rest of the public. So this morning, with the help of Jana Moore, who's a research associate in our group and does research and also systems, we're going to show you what we've come up with. And this is a tool that we hope you can use. So Jana, I think we're going to take away first with a short video. And we'll play the video so you could see the overview. And then if you have questions, I will ask Jana to answer them. Thank you.
As the state's public land-grant research university, it is the University of Missouri System's responsibility to meet the teaching, research, public service, and economic development needs of the state of Missouri. In an effort to manage its resources in the best interest of Missouri citizens, the University of Missouri has put into place strategic plans to guide the investment decisions that will ensure the greatest return for the university in the next 5 years. Located on the University of Missouri's System Administration homepage, a tab to the strategic planning process can be accessed, which, when selected, will direct the viewer to the Office of the President's Strategic Planning homepage. From the left-hand column navigation menu, the user can select the dashboard homepage for further examination of these plans. But what is a dashboard? Much like the dashboard of a car, which displays, at a glance, information for the driver, a strategic planning dashboard displays information on predefined metrics or goals for the institution. Information on this website outlines the metrics for the University of Missouri System and how we will measure progress towards achieving the strategic planning goals that we have set for ourselves. These dashboards will show the campus metrics, system-wide measures, and the UM System Administration's strategic initiatives all in one location. Thus, Missouri's constituents will have right at their fingertips concise information as to the successes of each plan. To view these dashboards, 6 navigation tabs, one for each strategic plan, plus one for system-wide measures, are located across the top of the home page. Here, the user selects the UM system-wide measures, then moves to the UM System Administration tab, followed by each campus dashboard: MU, UMKC, Missouri S&T, and UMSL. Let's examine one of these dashboards by selecting the Missouri S&T navigation tab. Focusing on the upper third of the screen, to the left you will see the strategy statement specific to the University of Missouri S&T strategic plan. On the right is an active icon to the university's strategic planning brochure. One click will allow the viewer in a separate browser a condensed version of the strategic initiatives. Just below the strategy statement and active icon are 3 sets of measures or metrics: accountability measures, strategy metrics, and best-in-class metrics. To view the progress of an individual measure or metric, the user simply clicks on the drop-down pane of the metric they wish to view. By hovering the pointer over the graph or the legend to the left, more information is revealed. Additional features to the dashboard include a link to the full plan, definitions if needed, a link to allow the user to print plan metrics, a drop-down pane of comparison metrics, and contact information for each plan. The dashboard is designed as a reporting tool to show the university's accountability to uphold the standards and obligations set forth in this strategic plan. In order to continue to serve the citizens of Missouri, together the 4 campuses and the system of the University of Missouri must chart a course that ensures our vitality well into the future. This requires strategic thinking about the university's areas of focus and how to apply precious resources to those endeavors. We invite you to check back on the progress to ensure this is happening over the course of the next 5 years by visiting strategicplan.umsystem.edu.
Okay, that video will be posted on the website so that anyone who wants to get oriented and understand how to use the dashboard can do so, but I think it's fairly straightforward. Obviously, I didn't do the voiceover. I'd like to make that clear. That was Jana's voice, and I think she did a nice job. Jana's here right now, though, to do this live with you and to sort of show you around the website, because we know that's a little quick, or to answer any questions you may have. So, Jana, why don't we show them, why don't we look at the system-wide measures first, if we could. I also realize that for those of you who are on this side of the room, this screen is very small. I thought we'd be looking at a screen more like that size, but please bear with us. On that side of the room, I'm sorry. Yeah. So you can see in the system-wide measures, those things that we're looking at. If you could scroll up a little bit. 6-year graduation rates, first-year retention rates, pass rates on licensing exams, federally funded research, and proportion of operating expenses on core functions. Why don't we click the last one if we could, Jana? All right, and what you see here then is, as she said, the baseline number, where we are currently, and where our target is. As we go through the plan then, we'll be reporting on these and we'll be setting new targets as we go forward. Let's take a look at another one. Let's look at 6-year graduation rates. And this is at the system level. So again, our baseline is about 61.5%. We're currently at 63.6%. The target 3 years ago was 58.9%. We've clearly surpassed that. So a new target will now be set. That target will be to the right of where we are currently, and we'll continue to update as we go through the next 4 years. You want to look at a specific institution? We could do that. Let's take a look at MU. We could. So click at the top. There's a dashboard for Columbia. And again, now what you see is a different set of metrics. First, best-in-class metrics. Then let's click to strategy metrics and accountability metrics. All right. So accountability metrics, headcount enrollment, FTE enrollment, student diversity, total degrees awarded, development of annual fundraising. Let's take a look at student diversity. I feel like a game show host at this point.
When we talk about targets, Hank, is this a target in the next year, 5 years? Are they all different?
These were targets that were set 3 years ago, and we're seeking to achieve those, I think, by, in this case, I think this is a 5-year target. Let's go back and look. Great question. You can answer it here by rolling over target. Could you do that again slowly? And what we see is this is value established by the campus. Target date is FY 2018 for this one. So the target is 13.2%. They're currently at 12.2. Their baseline is that number. So this is a very recent number, right? The baseline is the same as the current number, and they're seeking to go up by another %. Yes?
How easy would it be to have a fourth category that would measure us against peer institutions or best practices?
Great question. Depends on the category. If it's in diversity, we could do it. If it's in other areas, we'd have to look carefully at it. But again, in this one specifically, Curator Phillips, or do you mean across the board?
No, I just meant
Across the board.
conceptually.
Yes, we could do that in certain areas.
We're just measuring against ourselves here with targets that are moving targets.
That's right. So also we can measure against the state, as I showed you in the previous presentation. You know, if we're talking about something like diversity and the state diversity level is here, and we're here, we can move up. And we could compare that to organizations and universities around the area. President Wolf.
The five performance measures that we're accountable to at the state level is comparing to our peer groups. And so that's one unique. Your question's valid for these others, but those 5 in particular, like when you look at the percentage of our budget that goes to our core mission where we perform at 77%, our peer group is at 72%. So those are averages of our selected peer group, public AAUs from MU and the other peer groups defined by the other 3 colleges.
So that was part of the strategic planning process.
So some of them do, but I think your question is appropriate for these other categories as well.
Because those metrics that you're talking about are the ones that are used for performance funding?
Correct,
These
yes.
are the ones for performance funding.
And then when I hover over baseline, a couple years from now, perhaps if I hover over baseline, it should say the year baseline started, so I can measure the progress over years.
Can we do that right now? Getting 3-year X, we should do that. Can we do that, Jen?
Just so you know when
Good-
baseline starts.
Good idea, yes.
The state performance funding is done annually, so that's why it's different than the other baseline years.
So you could go through, you can explore those. I think that on the campuses, they may follow suit and create their own separate dashboards for their curators and the like. We'll see that coming forward. Some may, some may not. We also tie directly to their strategic plans. Maybe we could do that. Let's pick S&T as an example and show how that works. All right, so here's Missouri S&T, all the same metrics, but now we can click right in there. Yeah, I wanted to go to their full plan, actually.
Oh,
it's right there.
okay.
And show that we go, this is linked then to their website. And there she is, the Chancellor of S&T, smiling at us from her wonderful strategic plan. And so now anyone who's interested in S&T can really go into a deep dive in what they're trying to do. So what we're really trying to do is keep the strategic plan as surfaced as possible in everyone's mind so that we're focused on it, we're constantly working it. We have a calendar of events that goes with this, reporting times, review times, and the like. And this should help everyone. Yeah, we could show the timeline, actually. This should help all of us to stay on track and to really be sure that we're doing everything we can do to match this strategic plan. And so you could go through this and you could see the sort of day-to-day things that we are doing to make sure this plan comes to fruition. Questions, comments, thoughts for the good of the order?
It's pretty neat, and it really makes everybody in the state or anywhere, gives them the ability to, gives us transparency for what our goals are.
Thank you for saying that. And I'd like to thank Jana and her colleagues, especially. This has not been an easy task, and it's one that she's really done a wonderful job over in the last, I would say, 12 weeks to bring this together very quickly. That involved interfacing with all the campuses. That involved interfacing with people who really understand how to write these programs and so forth, and then also taking a lot of suggestions on the design that you put together. So thank you very much. Let's thank Jana, though. Yes, Curator Good.
Let me make a suggestion.
Yes.
It's helpful when we have time
Yes.
to look at this stuff before we get here. And I imagine, in fact, I know from past experience that some of it doesn't get here because it's just not all put together in time. But if that can be addressed, and then if a link can be put in there to go to a site where we can link to it and pull it up and look at it because it doesn't work to put it in there, I think that would be helpful in getting us prepared for
Sure.
meetings.
Absolutely. We could even have a discussion at the next meeting if you'd like. You're right, though. This came together, and it has been a frenzied amount of activity, and we're happy to say it's gone live now. So if you go to the, let's see, if you go to the system website, go to strategic planning, pull down, you'll go directly to this. It's live. It's out there. But getting to that point, there was like, well, you know, look at the, never mind, I'm not going to say anything about that. Websites sometimes can be tricky just before you have to go forward.
Yeah.
But we did
Well,
get it
I
done.
understand.
And that's the reason why it wasn't done a little sooner.
Well,
So thank you very much.
And Wayne, to follow on to your point, it's very helpful now that we all know what the strategic plans are, that as we come to the meetings, if our action items were tagged to which strategic plan particular those action items relate to, I think that'd be very useful for us to also stay on the same page.
It really changes the culture, and this is a cultural changing tool. Janet, could you just go back for Curator Good and show us from UM system how you get to this place again?
Sure.
For all the curators and others who are interested. So go to UM system.
And there are several different paths, but this is just one.
Strategic plan. This you've seen before, but what's different now is on the left-hand side, all of those pieces. And the dashboard is that fourth one or fifth one down. Takes you to the home, explains it. Did we also mention that you could do the brochure? We did. Okay. Thank you.
I think next we're going to hear from Steve Knorr. Steve? Thank you, Curator Ponder. After following Hank, if he's the game show host, I guess I'm the person in the back flipping the wheel or whatever. But we'll try to do our best we can here. We're going to start off with, because I think actually this is a good transition into, from what Hank's conversation was, to, let me make sure I get the proper one here. It's just, I thought we'd start off with a quote: doing business without advertising is like winking at a girl in the dark. You know what you're doing, but nobody else does. And that's a little bit of the strategic plan. This was a quote from 1956. So even in today's world, I think it still applies. With the strategic plan, that helps us make sure that we're on task and heading in the right direction, and that our strategic plan actually gives us focus, so that we are communicating the right way. So if you think about our theme with the strategic plan, advocate for the support of higher education and the University of Missouri, it builds on itself with the next lever, which is increase awareness and appreciation of the University of Missouri system and higher education statewide, and then our action plan of plan a statewide outreach campaign. So from the theme to the lever to building upon the action, they all build on themselves to help give us focus, so we know what we're doing and people can understand what the University of Missouri is all about. So who are our audience members that we want to look at? Well, as President Wolf likes to say, it's all 6.2 million Missourians. That is our audience as the University of Missouri system. And so when you start to think about how are we going to communicate with Missourians, it's through the media, through newspaper, print, online, broadcast, radio and TV, and then social and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, or whatever may be the newest communications effort in the social media next week. But it's also our constituency groups, and we spent a lot of time on that yesterday as in our retreat, from our, what I call ambassador groups: curators, faculty, staff, students, retirees, our alumni groups, our friends groups, groups like Missouri 100 that you're aware of. But at the same point in time, it's also legislative groups, obviously the state and federal. And I just mentioned federal because if you think about Senator McCaskill and Senator Blunt, they too as well have all 6 million Missourians as their constituency group. So how are we interacting with them on a go-forward basis on our communications? Organizations that we have that we deal with, COFI, our other counterparts around the state, CBHE, and then our national associations that we're a part of. And so it's all of those things that we interact with to be able to help get our message out. So our communications strategy, we have a 4-point plan: expand and show me value tour, proactive use of free media, target specialty paid media, and engage directly with constituency groups. So let's build upon this. We continued the tour and are up to 9 stops now with the Show Me Value tour, the last one being at Bayless High School in St. Louis just last Friday. Thanks to Chancellor Tom George. He joined us for that event, as well as Beth Bankhead, who is the Executive Director of the Missouri College Advising Corps. Bayless High School is one of 26 Missouri College Advising Corps schools in the state. And just a real quick note on that is that the MCAC program is focused in our legislative priorities this year that you have all approved and voted on. But this program announced an expansion to double the amount of schools statewide. It's paired with the tour, and this program is to help integrate kids, to give them advice of how to basically plan and to go to college. And so we are working with those schools and with that program along with the Show Me Value tour. So with those 9 stops, as Curator Ponder tries to keep my focus always on the students, I want to make sure we highlight that, because that's a big part of the beginning of the Show Me Value tour. And we have 3,720 students so far that we've been able to interact with, and over 30 media hits. And that is from print, radio, TV, just to name a few of those. But you begin to kind of see the pattern of from the print, the TV, and the radio, how the state begins to get covered from the Show Me Value stops. Next month, we will be back in Kansas City, and then we'll have 6 more stops before the end of the year. These are great opportunities for chancellors, as well as the Board of Curators. I just encourage you to attend any of these that you possibly can to help join the President on the Show Me Value tour and our events. After the President opens up the door, though, it's not a matter of just leaving. And so what we've been able to do is follow that up with op-eds, pieces back to the local paper, because we go in and make those connections. The local folks are so happy to have the president come in and to be able to talk about the University of Missouri, how they're interacting, how we're interacting on a local basis, and then we follow that back up. Either that's print, radio, or all the different mechanisms that we use. And so we don't want to just come in once and then leave. It's an ongoing planned process that we have. Here you see the president actually doing a radio interview in his office. And I just point that out because this is an opportunity for the president to be all over the state and get the message out again on higher education in the University of Missouri on a local basis. But he can do that multiple places in one setting. He can be in Northwest Missouri, Southeast Missouri, all in one setting in one time, and to be able to get the message out. It's been working. As the map shows, by the end of May, we'll have at least 22 counties that we have visited personally, and over 50 communities that we've been able to feature with media hits. So the state is starting to get covered, as you can see, as we kind of progress along. One of the other areas, in addition to the interviews with the president, we've had guest columns published in specialty publications. So this is just another area. Are we filling kind of all the buckets that we possibly have out there? These include a piece in the Rural Missouri magazine that is on the left, focused on extension efforts as well as telehealth and veterinary medicine. We also had a feature in the Show Me Missouri Farm Bureau magazine that focused on rural medicine. So we worked with both of those organizations to get that out. Why is that important? These are significant placements because rural Missouri, and the state's largest paid monthly consumer magazine, reaches 545,000 readers across the state. And its readership is over 1.3 million Missourians. Also, Show Me Missouri magazine, the Farm Bureau magazine, reaches 110,000 members. And so it's just another avenue for us to have the president and the University of Missouri's message out. Next, we're going to look at target specially paid media as well. One of the last ways that we can work on doing this. This supplemental piece that we're currently working on will feature the university that shows the value of the university to the entire state through its research, leadership, extension, and agriculture stations. The magazine will be finished in April. It will be distributed widely through schools, employers, extension offices, basically anywhere that we possibly can get that out. We want to show the university in this piece that we're good stewards of public resources, that it gives Missourians a good return on its investment, and it makes lives better for all Missourians through healthcare, research, economic development, and influences Missourians on a daily basis. So that's just another piece that we have out there. We also want to engage directly with constituents groups, and I put this one up first because you as curators, and hopefully we've come close to where your hometown is with these yellow dots, is that you're also our starting point and part of our constituent group and how you can help give that message out in order to reach all 6 million Missourians. So if we think about that and we want to build on that, obviously our campuses provide another constituency group. Clearly our 4 campuses with alumni and friends and faculty, staff, and all of their interactions that they have reach all of Missourians all over the state. And that's why we have asked the chancellors on each of the 4 campuses to allow us to work with a liaison. The chancellors have appointed a liaison on each of their campuses that we can work with, then to get a consistent message across the state through all 4 campuses to friends groups, alumni groups, and we have a consistent message, and that has worked wonderfully. And so the next slide, I know it's kind of busy, but I'm trying to illustrate a point here, because after you do that and you have a consistent message, it's going out through all of the different avenues that the campuses have available, whether that be faculty, staff, alumni, retirees, you name it. The next thing I want to show is just all of the different kinds of constituent groups that we have. So whether that's the Missouri 100 Friends of the President group, Alumni Alliance, and many others, I think you're starting to get to see the point that we have a very detailed, consistent plan here of how do we engage not only the media side of things, but our constituency groups to help us get the message out and ultimately go back to what our theme is, which is advocating for higher education and the University of Missouri and moving that forward. So
One of the final things that I want to bring up is that this is the 100th anniversary of the Cooperative Extension Service. And with that, I cannot think of a better time to launch a series than local town hall meetings across the state, where the local meetings with the president, extension leaders, elected officials, business types, and media will bring a focus of the University of Missouri and extension to the benefit of the area and the citizens. This is not necessarily about lobbying. What this is about is educating the citizenry of the state on a local effort and the benefits that the University of Missouri brings to that local hometown or county that extension and the University of Missouri provide. And so we're going to have our first kickoff meeting is planned for Marshall on February the 14th, Valentine's Day, and the president is lined up to begin to do that. But what's going to make this go is the president can't be a one-man band here. We're going to have to bring others into this marching band. And so with the extension's help, and then having chancellors who can be a part of this to come in and be able to talk about the university, as well as a challenge to the board is that as we have those events in your local area, in your local town, county, this is an opportunity for the board to be able to interact with the extension folks, your local business types, to just be able to build on that constituent group relationship that we're trying to do. And so we'll keep you posted as we go through this. But our kickoff is on February the 14th, and we're very excited about that. We certainly want to thank our friends in the Extension Council and others who have adopted this to really help us out. So it's going to be a team effort as we go forward. You do all of those things, hopefully that we can build on our legislative outlook in the state. And so this is going to be the next part that I want to transition into, of looking at the budget outlook, other legislative issues, kind of our capital funding, and just a federal update. And so we do all those things for a purpose.
Steve, let me interrupt you before you
Yes,
move on
go
to
ahead.
the next topic on legislative. I would just encourage you, and I think you probably will anyway, but I know Cindy can access this list. As you're organizing these meetings across the state, obviously keep in mind the current curators, but we have a great list of curator emeriti that are all around the state as well.
Yep.
And I would encourage you to tap into them as well, because I know many of those are very interested in doing what they can to help.
Yeah, thanks, Curator Downing. I think what we're, and that's a great point, because what we're trying to do is, again, the president can't be in all those locations, and I'm sure the chancellor can't either. So we need to be able to bring something of what I want to say, kind of a heft to those meetings, and having board of curators or people who know us really well, like former board of curators, that can come and talk about the university in a great way, I think is going to be a good help to us. So
I would also ask that you consider, and probably you have, but the possibility of having at these local gatherings someone who has been a beneficiary of the extension program. I would hearken to our own orientation experience, how much I learned, and the fact that somebody here started a small business, and those people were with us to tell us what assistance the university gave to them. And that told the story in a way that I hope that every member of the legislative body, executive, everywhere could hear. So that's a difficult model, I know, especially to get a legislator in at all.
Yeah.
But it is a compelling story.
great point, and I think Curator Covington hit on it, and I probably need to articulate a little bit better about the extension meetings and how we do this. This is not about so much the president coming to talk. This is about the local extension members or people who have been involved with extension to come and really do the talking. The president is kind of just to be able to answer some questions and help out from that standpoint, or the leaders are coming in. But your point is exactly right. It's how do we have the local people who've been involved with either extension or the University of Missouri, and how it's helped them, benefited them, and whether that be whatever avenue that may take on. But it's the local feel, and really that's the great thing about partnering with extension, I think, that is really going to make this go.
I think that extension is a possible best PR for the university, that not the best, but among the very best, if we figure out how to do it right.
Thank you. So no other question. I'll kind of transition into what is the current budget outlook. One of the things I wanted to start off with, and we had a little bit of discussion on this yesterday, but the consensus revenue estimate, which usually takes place in December, and the consensus revenue estimate is formed by the legislature and the governor. And that is basically what's your budget going to be, and then after you establish that number, then you begin to put your budget together and say, here's how I want to see my budget. The governor makes his recommendation in the state of the state. The legislative body then takes those and begins to put bills together. This year, for the first time in a long time that I try to go back and see, and Wayne, you may be able to help me out on this, but I can't recall the last time we haven't had an agreement on a consensus revenue to begin to start the budget. I know it's probably happened before, but what happens is that this particular year, the governor has projected a 5.2% increase in revenue for 2015. So we're getting ready to go into the 2015 budget cycle that they're putting together because we're currently in 2014. So the fiscal years for 2015, he has projected 5.2% increase. The legislature had disagreed with him, and they have projected a 4.2% increase. That is a difference of about $150 million. I've seen varying numbers, but around $150 million. And so why do I bring that up? Because what the legislative body have said is they're going to use the 4.2% growth as they put together their budget. They are not using the governor's 5.2%. And I have no idea where that's going to end up. At the end of the day, it's a long time between January and May. They may be able to have some projections that the economy is growing hopefully great and quick, just as the governor has pointed out. But I just put that out there because there is that disagreement over the overall budget to start off with. Now, with that in mind, though, we certainly want to look at the governor's recommendations that he put out in his State of the State. And we had some very good numbers for us to be able to sink in. And quite frankly, they align with much of what this board approved for your budget plan. And I had Cindy print off, and I'll just, hopefully you have that at your packet. Just as a reminder, this is the legislative priorities that the board approved. It seems like a long time ago. It would have been last June. And so from the appropriations request to capital priorities, those are items that you have. And I think you'll see that many of those things line up with the governor's recommendations. So performance funding is part of the governor's request, 5.2% increase. That's about a $21 million increase. And so that is a great starting point. Carrying from Missourians' mental health proposal, which Dr. Hank Foley's team worked on with the rest of the state and the governor to come up with that package to help fulfill that need, is $12.2 million overall. It's a 3% increase. That's $12.2 million for the university. The STEM funding, again, it's a 3% increase. That's another $12.2 million increase. I know the president is going to address the STEM issues in his remarks, so I won't go into that. The Bright Flight Scholarship, $17 million increase. Again, that is to tackle preventing our best and brightest from leaving the state, which has been a huge concern, one that the governor is trying to tackle. How do we keep our best and brightest in Missouri after they graduate? And so the governor has proposed a $5,000 forgiveness or scholarship for students who commit to stay in the state of Missouri after they graduate. So that is a very good incentive. And then Access Missouri, which is another scholarship need-based program, an $8.5 million increase in the program to bring that to a total of $62 million. And as Hank just went through some of those numbers, you can see that we have needs in all of those areas in a great deal.
Steve, the STEM funding, that's an increase to our core, isn't it? The 3%?
That is an increase to our core, yes. And we have very needs that's not been specifically Curator Downing prescribed. I mean, I think it's up to each campus, whether that's labs, faculty, how we go about tackling that, because we have just a huge shortage and need in this state in that regard, and at the University of Missouri. Other legislative issues, we have the higher education funding formula, part of the COFI agreement that we have come up with. Senator Pierce has introduced that legislation. It is moving its way through. Multiple tax cuts and tax credit reform discussion lately, just as was done last year. There was a tax cut package of about $900 million. that would take revenue out of projected growth when it was fully phased in of 10 years. It's really identical pretty much to last year with a few caveats that were taken out of there. So my only point is there are multiple tax cut bills. They're not going to go away. It's going to be part of the discussion all year long, and it's something we certainly are aware of, concerned about, and are going to be watching very, very closely. Medicaid reform, again, multiple proposals, lots of discussion on Medicaid reform. It appears that the body is much in the same mode that they were last year, and I would put that into kind of a cloudy, more want to talk about it, and probably not in this election year going to see much done on the Medicaid reform. But you never know, but that's kind of what the early tea leaves look like anyway. And then ethics reform, I certainly don't want to get away from that because there's been a lot of discussion in that. And I think that's something that we certainly want to keep tabs on. One of the things that I do not have up there, but it was just filed yesterday, which is HJR 73. Caleb Jones, who's a state rep from locally here in Columbia, introduced a bonding package, a $1.2 billion bonding package, of which $600 million would be set aside for higher education. That's including community colleges. And so the bonding package that Chris Kelly has introduced in the past, Representative Caleb Jones has picked that up and is committed to trying to move that through as well. So speaking of bonding and then taking a look, I thought maybe what would
Steve, let me stop you and ask you a question. I assume from what you said that the legislature and the governor were not able to reach consensus on a revenue figure?
That's correct.
That's, last year I think they did agree.
They did. This was the first year that
First year in a long time that that hasn't occurred.
Correct. Yeah. So that just complicates kind of the starting point in the budget process. So on the capital side, and thinking about the bonding and the bonding package and capital, I know that we're going to have a great deal of discussion about capital. Again, the president will address that in a minute. But I thought it would be helpful for this, for the board to be able to see kind of the history of bonding and just for your own edification. And so if you look at the first bonding package, which was a little over $600 million in 1982, of which the University of Missouri received $148 million. Then 12 years later, there was another bond package for, what's the total on that? Around $250 million. Again, the University of Missouri, we had about $64 million. And then there was a revenue bond package for actually the Mizzou Arena, which was $35 million in 2004. So why do I show you that? Because it seems to be about over 30 years here, we've had 3 bonding packages. If you total all of those up, if I did my math correctly, that's a total of $247 million for the University of Missouri over a 30-year period. If you divide that out, that's about $8 million a year. So kind of puts it into some perspective from a capital side of things whenever you, certainly bonding is helpful, but it is one of those things that is not going to be sustainable for the dire needs that we have on the capital side of things. So the other way you can certainly do capital is through state appropriations. And so I, again, wanted to go back and show you kind of what did the last 20 or 30 years look like. And clearly in the 90s, whenever the economy was different, you saw a much more aggressive funding towards capital projects. And then the economy went south. But I want to point out in 2002, it also coincided with something else, which I don't have up here. But think about 2002, when that line comes down, that is when term limits took full effect. And so in 2002, with the term limit effect kind of kicked in with the economy, from there on out, you start to see this flat line down around 0, that you have very little action when it comes to state appropriations. We have currently, just as I've said before, we have 1 member out of the 197 members in the state body that have ever funded a capital project, and that's Representative Chris Kelly. He was in the state legislature in the late 80s, and so he is the only member, and this is his last year, that have ever funded a capital project. So with that in mind, and having a conversation with chancellors and others, and thinking about with that backdrop, we had to try to do something else. We had to try to change the paradigm. We had to try to, I guess, put more skin in the game, if you will. And so we developed a program that which we got authorized 2 years ago, and this is the first year that we've been able to approach the state on this program. And the program is the 50-50 match program. So it brings a new approach on capital funding, bringing private donors to the table along with a public-private partnership. And the university raises half in the project's cost, and the state, then we ask them for the match. It's not they shall match, it's they may match. And one of those things is that we have to be able to come back and show them that they're getting a good bang for their buck whenever they're going to do that. And so this year we have 7 projects across the 4 campuses for a total of $40 million in private funds and donations that we've raised. And now we're coming to Jefferson City to ask them to match that. So we're engaging many supporters to help us move this through, business and friends groups, including the Chamber of Commerce, the companies and foundations that helped support many of these projects, whether that's Ameren, J.E. Dunn, Burns & Mack, Kauffman Foundation, and the list goes on, alumni and supporters of the schools and colleges. And I just want to take a moment here to say this is more about the program itself and getting this program so people can understand again on the legislative side of what it's like to fund capital, that it's a good thing, they can leverage funds, they can put people to work, and bring in private donations from wherever. Some of our private donations, as our conference said yesterday, we're bringing in funds from California, New York. It's not just Missouri money. We're bringing money from elsewhere in this kind of, and so it's a great package. It's a thing that, a legislative item that I would just ask the Board of Curators in particular, as you have the opportunity to talk to legislative leaders and business types, and really all of our friends and alumni, as I went through the constituent group earlier, that is a single message that we're really trying to have everybody focus in on.
So Steve, you got a list of those 7 buildings for us?
We do. It is in your packet.
It's in here?
So if you go to, it's Curator Bradley, it's the one with the red line on it. And we've broken it down. What we tried to do is we broke it down by the total project cost, the square footage, the private support that we would be getting.
Oh, there it is. Okay, yes, gotcha.
And then we also listed some of the major donors, and then just the overall benefits. It's a very short synopsis, but it would be a good tool for you to have at a quick glance. Certainly, I don't want to forget about the federal side of things. For the first time since 2011, the federal government came to an agreement on all 12 budget bills, and so on January the 13th, they passed the FY14 budget agreement. It increases research for agencies. It's still below the sequestration levels. As you recall, that was a $1.2 trillion sequestration of trying to lower the federal debt, but it stays below those. Pell Grant's maximum increase to $57.30. So again, back to the financial aid presentation, that is clearly Pell Grant is a very big part of our student financial aid. Ag-related items, whether that's extension, experiment stations, and competitive grants, actually received some additional funding for increased funding above sequestration. The President signed that on January the 17th to go through September the 30th. So they'll begin the budget cycle all over again. The State of the Union, which kind of kicks that off, the President had a couple highlights that I wanted to talk about, which was the Year of Action, which is issues of income inequality, immigration reform, and jobs. And then he also highlighted the higher education aspects, access, and importance of research. He had a conference, a summit before, the week before. Deputy Chancellor Mike Middleton actually attended and was at the White House in attendance to that, and I'm sure could give you some additional details on that front. I'm happy to answer any questions. Kind of brings me to the close, and I think I have a final slide here.
So Steve, you don't have 50% on all of these yet, do you? Like there's one like the Fine Arts Center, you haven't raised $35 million private money yet.
That's correct.
Just everything else is you've raised the 50% on. Looks like.
Yep, I think that is correct. As the projects should be hopefully on here now, that is correct, Curie Bradley.
So bottom line, the legislative's answer to all these needs is to cut taxes.
Could be.
Well, that's what they did.
Only spoken like a former senator.
That's what they're doing in Kansas, but I'm not sure it's working over there.
Yeah. I think as the president, if you didn't have a chance to see the editorial out of the Post-Dispatch earlier this week, President Wolf was at the Post-Dispatch last week. Probably I wouldn't want to speak for him, but I think he articulated the point, and it was highlighted in the editorial, which is let's get back to looking at the state's priorities as set in the Constitution. And if debt, paying the state's debt is number one, and then paying education is number two, let's take a look at the Constitution and allow our policies to be set from that. And I think that was very well articulated.
It was good editorial.
Is there any connection between the 50-50 match and the potential of bond money? Or is the 50-50 match coming out of immediate revenues? If it connects with the bond, does that delay the projects?
So the answer to that question is that it should be separate. We want to keep it separate because what we are hoping to do, Curator Phillips, is to establish the mindset that this is a year to year. It's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, because once donors understand that the state is committed and that they're willing to match, they're going to be more likely to come back next year and put money on the table. If that doesn't happen, then our concern is that donors are going to say, it's really not a program, it doesn't look like the state's committed, and that's the message that we've been trying to get through. We feel like that our budget leaders in the House, whether that's Rick Stream or in the Senate, understand that message. The bonding package that was, if it's put part of that, depends how it's done. And if it's going to be a bonding package that would be part of the vote of the people, take out to the vote of the people, you have a lot of what ifs there before those kinds of things happen. Does that mean, as I just put up, are you going to do that once every 12 years? That's really not the message that we want to send back to our donors. What we're trying to establish is thinking outside the box as we begin to go forward and we become creative in the ways that we can start to fund this. Again, we're not asking for hundreds of millions of dollars. It is a rather modest $20 to $40 million that we could really put to work. And so I think the answer is there might be some who would like to tie that. We believe it's a separate program, and it's critical that we establish that separate program for our donors as we move forward.
You really need both.
Need both, right. I don't want to say that we're not supportive of the bonding program. It's a different function than the 50-50.
Other questions? Steve, you have an additional item for us?
As I understand it, we'll, at the end of the presentation, kind of be able to put up what the agenda items may be for the Board of Curators over the next several months. And so those are there before you. If you have Curator Ponder any additional items that we want to think about or add, I think this is an appropriate time to do that, or we can do that after you've had a chance to think about it.
Suggestion would be to circulate the list of proposed agenda items and then circle back to that at a later time. But of course, the floor is open if anybody wants to suggest that we tack something on because they've got it top of mind now, that's okay.
Mike, let me explain. We have this agenda item, I know, on each of our committees, and the intent was to have each of the committee chairs and all board members have a chance to think now and on an ongoing basis about what topics are important to the board to be addressed in the committee meetings as we go forward, and to articulate those so that our administration and staff have an opportunity to consider those, get relevant information, and respond in a way that would be appropriate. So not that anybody has to articulate anything now, but just be thinking about those as we go forward. And if you have anything now, I'm sure the administration would love to hear it.
Don? Or maybe Tim, how quickly is the retirement issue coming back to the board to look at?
April.
I had a question about the 50/50 cost sharing. I think the last meeting or the meeting before, I'd asked that these same projects were proposed, and I asked if MU was having some. They said that they were going to have some, and then I think S&T was going to add another project, but I don't see those.
So I think if you flip it to the back page, you'll see the MU projects.
Okay. Thank
They
you.
have 4 projects. Yes.
Steve, I don't know if a calculation has been done, but obviously jobs are very important to those in Jefferson City and throughout our state. And I know each of these projects will involve the creation of numerous jobs. And if you haven't already done the math, that would be one suggestion.
Being one that doesn't want to steal my boss's thunder, I read his speech earlier, and I'll let him address that.
Sorry. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Further business for the committee? Mr. Chairman?
Need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Cindy?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Ponder?
Yes.
Okay. All committee votes in favor.
Okay. Now we're going to reconvene our Finance Committee. Chair Covington?
Thank you, Chairman Downing. The Finance Committee has one information item today, one action item today, and then as well, an item for discussion with respect to upcoming meetings, topics, which Tom Richards and I have discussed a little bit. Tom has, at my request, prepared a slide that shows what we regularly cover and then reflects something, a couple of topics that the board has discussed wanting to have covered, and then another suggestion of mine, but that will be the final piece of our meeting this morning. And there he is.
In case you missed the switch, I am not Steve Knorr. I want to start actually not start a discussion, but revisit a discussion today about our facilities and strategic needs with our facilities. And just wanted to say at the outset, the purpose of this discussion is just to bring this back before the board in a little bit more detail, in a way that helps us understand, get our arms around the numbers a little bit better. We're going to throw out some ideas today, but I want to be clear, we're not proposing anything specifically. I'm going to show you some ideas. They're really designed to generate discussion and start what should continue to be a continuing discussion. Again, I know President Wolf will talk about that as well, and Steve just gave us some background from the state's perspective. But we do have some issues that merit our attention that are very important. And again, just from the perspective that we talked about in the context for tuition and our budget pressures over the past several years, this is something that had to take sort of be put on the back burner as we dealt with all the other issues in terms of the declining revenues, et cetera, and the economy. But we want to get back to this because the problem, the issue is there, and it merits the attention. I'm going to start out with just 3 numbers. And I wondered if I brought an envelope and I held it up to my head and I read these numbers off, if that would trigger anything with people. It made me think of something, but I won't mention it. But 3 very important numbers: 1,534, 29.4 million, and $8.49 billion. Oh, I gave it away. So just to setting the stage, why is this an important discussion? Believe it or not, but trust me, across the system, the campuses, the health system, we have 1,534 buildings, almost 29.5 million square feet of space with a replacement value of about $8.5 billion. We know this because we have an extensive inventory of all of our buildings. We engage in best practices in inventorying those buildings using consultants that help out institutional owners such as ourselves. We've got really good data, but this is the starting point, and this is why the discussion matters. just to break it down, this is in your materials, I won't go into detail, but if you kind of break down where those 1,534 buildings are, this gives you the detail. This is all-inclusive, everything. This is academic side, this is the auxiliaries, the health system obviously is in there as well. For purposes of the discussion, though, today, I want to focus on the educational space because, and just this graph toward the left will show that the educational space is about 64% of the square footage. The red chunk of the pie, about 36%, is the auxiliary space. The auxiliaries tend to have their own revenue sources and are able to take care of their facilities needs through dedicated fees. Obviously, the health system would be in there, our dormitories, generally athletic facilities and things of that nature. The blue piece of the pie, the 64%, is the educational space and also the space that's traditionally been provided by and taken care of by the state. So there is no dedicated funding stream necessarily to take care of that. So breaking out the state component of the buildings, you can see over there on the right-hand side that about, 35% of the educational space in our buildings is over 50 years old. That's probably not a surprise, just being on the campuses and seeing that. But in terms of kind of looking at what we have to deal with, that's the physical plan. So I mentioned that we engage consultants. We use best practices methodologies to assess each of our buildings. And we talk about, and we give you information that we call, the acronym is FCNI. It's a Facilities Condition Needs Index. And it's how we benchmark our buildings against best practices sort of across the industry, and not necessarily just focused on higher ed, but just in terms of managing a large inventory of buildings generally. To cut to the chase, just to put it in perspective, when we throw out the number, the definition down below, the Facilities Condition Needs Index, if you can just think of it of the numerator is the cost to address whatever needs are present in any given building, and the denominator is the replacement value of that building. So from a best practices standpoint, if you're managing your portfolio overall, the best practices is to be at a 0.3 or below. So what that really would mean is that your needs overall are 30% or less of your total replacement value of the building. So if you can hit that metric and maintain that and manage to it, you're doing a pretty good job. As we'll see in a little bit, the other metric, if you hit a 0.4 or above, that's when you start to have issues, and it almost suggests that you need a complete renovation of a building. At some point, you make the choice of whether you tear the building down and start from scratch, or again, you do a complete gut renovation, and those involve some qualitative factors. So what do we look like? And again, we provide the information to you, but we just wanted to talk in a little bit more detail. We've thrown out a number, in the last year or so about this unmet need of $1.3 billion. And what we're trying to do today is to break that down into a more manageable piece to get our arms around. But this is the result of sort of, again, this inventory of all the facilities, all the buildings, and just kind of breaking it up into some different categories. Just focusing on the critical, the red column, and then the urgent, I don't know what that is, a dark orange or something like that. Based on the assessments, the red column would indicate the needs are critical or immediate, and based on the assessment overall, about $35 million. Urgent needs, again, best practice within a year, $186 million. I asked for a good example from our facilities people of how would I convey that to you in a way that would make sense. Critical would be the roof is leaking and the water is a problem. Urgent would be the roof is at the end of its life and it's about to start leaking, just to kind of give some perspective, and we could break it down in all kinds of different examples. But in terms of the needs by campus and looking at it this way, this starts to give some sense. So the other thing, though, the maybe encouraging thing is when we do throw out the $1.3 billion, 837 million of it is in sort of this necessary 2 to 5 year category. So again, I don't want to paint the picture that we are in the midst of a crisis. I don't think that's the case. We take care of the buildings as best we can. And again, the question always comes up, do we have safety issues that we're not addressing? And I think we would all say those are the top priority, and that's how resources would be prioritized first. Here's another visual, and again, this is taking the same FC&I data by campus. This gives a picture of how the campuses compare in terms of the condition. And we've got the brackets around the two lower pieces of the bar. So from basically here to here, those two colors, that would indicate that that sort of percentage of the square footage on that particular campus would be at a 0.4 or above. So the data would suggest for those two lower bars bracketed that for a 0.4 or above, that you're looking at basically significant renovations of those buildings is the most likely thing that needs to happen. You can see across the board we've got very different sets of conditions, and there are stories behind each one. But if we look at the St. Louis campus in particular, and again, we've talked about this, the chancellor's talked about this, of course, but 80% of the square footage at the St. Louis campus would fall into a 0.40 or above, indicating a major significant renovation of that space would be needed. The best condition overall, taking into account most green, would be UMKC, and that's reflective of really a large amount of investment that's been done over the past decade. And again, slightly smaller campus, or smaller obviously than MU, but this just gives you a sense of what we're dealing with and how the issues vary by campus. What we wanted to do is just kind of pause here because again, we throw out a lot of numbers, and what I'd done is ask Gary Ward from MU to come up and talk with you for just a few minutes about looking at one particular building. So we've got all this data up here that's kind of overwhelming, and we're throwing out millions of square feet. We're throwing out these needs. But what we wanted to take a look at was just one building, have Gary walk you through that building to get a sense of what this means for the campuses, for the students and the faculty.
Thank you, Tom. Just to give a quick overview of our College of Engineering, as Ken Dean mentioned the other night, we have 3,300 undergraduate students, 600 graduate students, 105 tenure faculty, and 140 total faculty, and we have about $30 million a year in research through the College of Engineering. 70% of our College of Engineering is housed in Lafferty Hall. It all began in 1892 with the Mechanical Arts Building, followed a year later by the 1893 Engineering Building, and then in 1910 there was a fire in the Mechanical Arts Building. For whatever reason, they did not address that until 1920, and when they renovated that building, they also added on the 1920 addition. Then in 1935, the Engineering Labs Building was added, 44 in addition to the Engineering Labs Building, 54 addition, and then in 91 we renovated the 54 addition and added an addition onto that. The latest work we've done was in 2009, where we renovated, actually we replaced the 1920 building. So what we have today, in very technical terms, is a very complex, cobbled together mess. So I want to concentrate directly on the 35 and 44 additions. Tom talked a little bit about the FC&I, the Facilities Cost Needs Index. We're very fortunate that we have a facilities audit like this for every single one of our ENG buildings. This gives us some great data. For one thing, it gives us the replacement cost for this building. And that is simply what would it cost if that building to be replaced for a like building. It also gives us a needs or an audit for every single system within that building. For example, the electrical system, the mechanical system, code issues, floor issues, roof issues, and it puts the dollars to that, and then you take all those dollars and you divide that by that replacement value, and that will give you a facility conditions need index. For the 35 and 44 edition, we have a need index of 0.91. What that's saying is 91% of that building is shot and needs to be replaced. By definition, that is the type of building you would really tear down and just replace instead of trying to renovate. But look where it's located. It's in the middle of the complex, so that's going to make it even more expensive. So that total amount of deferred maintenance just for the 35-44 edition is $21.4 million. The estimated renovation cost is $32 million. I don't want you to get that confused with the replacement value. That is a renovation cost because what we're going to do is actually add some additional floors and square footage to that. Okay, I wanted to show you some pictures of the 3544 edition. When I started this, I took pictures of mechanical rooms and pipes and air conditioning units and things like that, and I thought, you know, that's really not the story we're trying to tell. I want you to see exactly what our students see and what our faculty see. This picture on the left is a classroom. It's a CNC classroom. From what I understand, every single one of our engineering students have to go through that classroom. If you know, it's really not even a classroom. It's a carved out space in a larger space. The one wall does not even go to the ceiling there, and the other side is equipment. So I can't imagine what it would be like trying to take a class in that particular room. The picture to the right is a research lab. It is a strength and materials research lab. Notice the wood fume hood. I think that's the oldest fume hood we have on campus. In contrast, these are some photos from the 2009 renovation. The photo on the left is an industrial engineering classroom. Notice that we've got everything on wheels. The idea there was to try to keep this room as flexible as possible to where it would meet not only today's teaching needs, but tomorrow's teaching needs as well. It's nothing over the top, just a very clean and efficient classroom. Same thing with the research lab on the right. That is a biochem and civil engineering research lab. It's just a standard lab, nothing over the top, but a very functional and working lab. This is a study space. This is in the 35 edition. It's in a hallway. As you can see, it's got concrete floors, concrete block walls, no acoustics in there at all. I can't see how you could have a conducive study session within that hallway. In contrast to that, this is a study area that was done in the 2009 renovation. So again, nothing over the top, but certainly is student-driven. I think it's important, though, to note that we all would agree that we would like our students and our faculty to have well-designed classrooms, well-designed labs, good study areas. But the truth be known,
Are these renovated photos in the same building?
that is the 2009 edition of the building. Yeah, all these renovated photos were in that same building, the 2009 edition. And as I was saying, we would all agree that we would like to have good space. But the truth be known is that's not what it's about. It's all about the teaching and research. It's not about the building. It's about the things that are going on within that building. And unfortunately, what's happening at Mizzou, and really I think we could say across all 4 campuses, is our facilities are slowly becoming an impediment to teaching and research. So what Tom asked me to look at is just at the 3544 edition, what would be the return on an investment, a $32 million investment, not just on wiping out $21 million worth of deferred maintenance. How is that directly attached to improving the academic mission? Well, for one thing, it supports the university's strategic operating plan for increased student enrollment. That's right off the bat. It would renovate approximately 25,000 gross square feet for undergraduate workspace, 15,000 square foot of research facilities. It would allow us to add capacity for up to 20 new faculty members that in turn would be able to increase our research expenditures by $21 million per year. It would give us enough additional space to go from 3,300 undergraduate engineering students to 4,000 and also allow us to grow our graduate enrollment as well. It would allow us to graduate, and this is real important, especially when we're going to look at the next bullet, 400 plus additional engineers per year. And then this last bullet, there was a paper recently completed by Dr. Tom Johnson and Tim Rossi out of our Truman School of Public Affairs. It says that for every additional engineer that a state has, the state's GDP will go up $3 million. And that's because of the innovation associated with an engineer, the economic development with innovation, and the GDP from a result of that economic development. So to me, the question is not about deferred maintenance. The answer to the return on the investment is what it can do for the institution and the state. Those 2 last bullets, I think, prove that point. And further, we have 20 more stories just on this campus that are very similar to Lafferty Hall, and many, many more across the state of Missouri in our system. Thank you. Any questions for me?
I don't know if this is a question for you or for Tom or both. Yesterday, we just increased fees to engineering students, part of which were supposed to go to lab renovations and space renovations and lab development and tech support. Is what you're describing the need for renovations here separate from those?
Yes, yes.
So it's not
That was
you're not doubling up on us?
No, no, that was for a very small amount for doing some, mainly geared, towards faculty, but most of that equipment, that renovation work would be for increased equipment.
So the bond bill that's just been entered can't apply to this, and the FIP doesn't qualify for 50/50, does it?
Yes.
It does?
Yeah, and that's going to be talked about. He's got some more on that. Thank you.
So that gives some perspective, again, from just one building, one of many across the system, in terms of helping put some context. I'm going to go back to some of the data, though. And again, all this ties together. Gary talked about the audit and how it is that we manage this. One of the things that we get as a result of these audits is sort of the optimized amount that we should be investing in our facilities every year. And again, keeping in mind that the 0.30 and this needs index is the benchmark. So within the modeling, given the conditions of the buildings where they are and what we need to do, that red line would represent the optimized amount of funding that the resources we'd have to invest each year to get us to the 0.3, to maintain the 0.3 going forward. What you're seeing below in the bars, 2009 through 2013, is what we've actually been able to invest. Now, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, that bar is a bit higher, and that's partially because of the projects that are going on currently. One of the projects that has had a really big impact at S&T is the geothermal plant installation, because that's allowed us to go in and attack a lot of the HVAC systems in all the buildings as they're being connected to that. So that's been a win-win in a number of ways. But to think about it, going back to that backlog of $1.3 billion, if what you're spending is below the red line, the backlog grows. If what you're spending is above the red line, you're eating away at the backlog. That's the simplest way to think about it, given all the data that we have, and you can see where our expenditures have been. In terms of where we are now by campus, again, going back to that FC&I index, the column on the left-hand side is where we are today. And again, 3 of the campuses are below the best practices benchmark of 0.3. St. Louis, again, is at a 0.4, which we'd sort of discussed previously. The thing that we should be, again, I don't want to paint the picture that we have a crisis today, because we don't. The problem is, if we continue the current trends at our current level of investment versus what we know is needed to be done, by 2023, so roughly 10 years, those are the projected conditions that we would have with our plant. MU would be above a 0.4. St. Louis would be almost to a 0.6. So it's just kind of setting the stage and saying we need to come back to this, because while there are no good choices, but we're going to talk about some ideas, there are no good choices. Probably the worst choice of all is to do nothing. Because as you know, as homeowners and property owners, it's just logical that if you have this kind of plant, you have 29 million square feet in our case, and you don't invest at the adequate levels, you're going to be creating problems that are larger and larger to deal with. And it's probably at a point where we can still manage this, and we've certainly been doing as well as best as we can, but somehow we're going to need more targeted investment to keep the hole from growing, if you will. So back to I mentioned here again, this is the ideal investment versus what we've been doing. If we break that additional investment down by campus, this just gives you a visual idea. Again, the numbers are staggering, and it's not to say that we're going to be able to come up with this kind of funding, but for 2015, it's saying optimally, we'd be investing an additional $51 million over and above what we're investing already. So the question is, what do we do? How do we change course? And again, I just had sort of mentioned that I guess the status quo, maintaining that, it's an option, but it's not a viable option, because the problem gets worse. And the worse the problem gets, the harder it is to try to tackle. The other thing is, in terms of capital investment, and this is something that we've talked about with the campuses, in terms of the best strategic way forward, it's not necessarily a matter of just throwing money at the issue or spreading it across the board or fixing a little system here in one building, a little system there in that building. What you miss out on then is something that Gary was talking about, is sort of strategic investment in a way that what you get at the end of that is something much greater than you had coming in. And it's not just about fixing the building systems, although that's certainly important, but it's about gaining the utilization from the facility so that you're getting more for your money, better bang for your buck. So what we did was just, again, to start a conversation. There could be many variations on this, but we wanted to start the discussion in a way that focuses on our strategic plan specifically, and STEM as well. So we had a discussion with the campuses about, if we threw out this conceptual criteria, we were trying to screen our needs for a potential project list. We certainly wanted to have projects that support the STEM focus and specifically tied into the campus strategic plans. In other words, we didn't want to just go identify the very worst buildings and target those for investments, because it may be a building or an area that is not strategic to the institution. So it wasn't just taken from that approach. It was what is strategic. Projects, number two, projects that would, again, reuse and improve existing space, targeting buildings that have issues, but also trying to target buildings, again, where we get more out of it at the end than we had going into it. Certainly we want a positive impact on the learning environment for a meaningful number of students and faculty. And then projects identified for funding should, of course, have ongoing operational costs in existence already. We don't want to create, ideally, we don't want to create a larger problem by, although there certainly are some cases in which we should do it, but new facilities drive new costs. So what we're trying to do is target issues that exist in ways where the funding to operate and maintain those buildings already exists. And then, and this alludes back to the example that Gary presented, ideally the building renovation, the end result, would have some ability to either drive revenue growth. So in the example that he used there, or the example would be at S&T or any of the campuses, could be to accommodate increased enrollment, where we just have capacity constraints. So to the extent it would help drive something like that, and or cost reductions. So again, lots of good examples of very old buildings that cost a lot to maintain, where if we do the strategic investment in those facilities, the operating costs going forward are substantially reduced, which allows you then to divert those resources into other projects. And then finally, just to kind of put some reasonable size around this, what would be projects that could be tackled within 5 years? So we came up with a list, again, just meeting the criteria. And we're just showing a list of projects that totals $200 million. There's no magic to that number. We had to pick a size, again, based on the criteria, trying to break it down into a bite-sized piece that we could actually absorb the numbers as we talk through them. One of the things I wanted to point out, while not going really into detail on the projects, is we're showing the FCNI ratings for each one of the buildings. So one of the things we wanted to do is, again, target buildings where there are need and where it will make a meaningful impact on the campus overall. So all these facilities that we're showing are a 0.4 or above, all the way up to the very worst, which would be Lafrey, which Gary described at a 0.9. The other thing that I'd point out, because I know we get confusion with all the lists of capital projects that we put before the board, pieces of these projects, Lafrey in particular, School of Medicine renovation at UMKC, Chemistry, Biological Sciences at UMKC, at S&T, and then Benton Stadler. All these facilities are top priorities on the capital appropriations requests that we give to the state. At least one of these facilities is part of a 50-50 match request. The other thing to point out, again, just trying to be more realistic, when we talk about Lafrey on this list at $32.6 million, that doesn't solve all the problems at Lafrey. But what we try to do is envision what would be bite-sized pieces that we could reasonably tackle with the resources that we have. Likewise with Benton Stadler, this alone, this $35 million alone, would not solve the entire Benton Stadler problem, but we're trying to get something that we could meaningfully move forward with. So how would this get paid for? And we're kind of going back to the lead-up that Steve Canora talked about. Certainly the best thing for the system would be state capital appropriations, either in the form of a one-time appropriation, which again hasn't happened that often, or certainly the 50-50 match program, which we're aggressively pursuing. And again, we have a 50-50 match at Laffrey as an example that would be very meaningful and very impactful. Wouldn't solve the whole problem, but it would have a meaningful impact on the facility and on that school. Second could be a state bond issue, and again, that would be great for the system if that would work its way through. We know that there are issues involved in terms of that getting done, but certainly that would be a great benefit to the system. So what else could we do? And by the way, it could be, hopefully, would be some combination of all the above. Well, the other way we could look at it strategically, given our ability to do some things that maybe other 4 years actually couldn't do, what if we just looked at it? And again, this is just conceptual. This is to start sort of thinking and discussion. If we took a list of $200 million in projects and we looked at sort of financing that, if we wanted to make some critical strategic investment and have an immediate impact on the campuses, on students, on faculty, on the learning experience, capacity for enrollment growth, et cetera, focused in the STEM area, $200 million investment, if that were financed over 15 years, the debt service would be almost $18 million a year. Now, one thing I'd pause and mention, there's a reason we've thrown out, again, conceptually 15-year financing. We probably can't afford, because the need is so great, especially when we're talking about these renovations, we probably really shouldn't be thinking of those as 30-year projects. Because behind this list of projects, there's another list of projects, and there's another list of projects behind that. And if we were to go down and do something like this, I think we'd have to be much more aggressive in terms of paying these off because the need is so great. So for the sake of conservatism, just throwing this out as an idea, we're looking at a 15-year number. That could be 10, that could be 20. 30 is probably not strategically advisable. So again, under this scenario, I guess the best possible scenario would be some kind of dedicated recurring state appropriation. Again, that would be certainly great to get instead of maybe the state doing a bond issue. In essence, we would do that ourselves given our resources with the state providing debt service. At the end of the day, something that would certainly be the last choice, the last resort, but something that's been done increasingly at other public universities is some kind of a student facilities fee. Whether that's a dedicated fee all by itself, whether it's a dedicated tuition increase, it's something that's been done. It would be the last choice, but at the end of the day, if the other revenue streams and sources did not come through, we're left with an issue that needs to be dealt with that will continuously grow year after year. And probably the strategy of sitting back and saying that we're waiting for the state to come through, that's probably not a viable strategy going forward. Again, we'd love to partner with the state. The 50-50 match program is probably the best, most viable way to do that. But at the end of the day, we have an issue that we have to deal with. So just for sizing, again, just to get some concepts out, this kind of a project plan, this kind of a financing structure with debt service, what would you need with a student facilities fee? Just on a per FTE basis, again, that's very generalized and there would be lots of details to work through, but you'd be looking at about $300 to $350 annually for a student fee to cover this kind of an investment. So again, yes?
Two comments. One, I know that a lot of alumni gifts go toward new buildings and things that are shinier than renovation costs, but I really think that we need to direct a lot of alumni giving from here going forward toward renovations. I mean, if they care so much about the university and building new buildings is good, but maintaining the university as it is, not just building it going forward, is, in my mind, almost equally important. So we need to save what we have. Now, my second comment is, I know you said it's the absolute last resort, but a student facilities fee for every single student, I mean, I already pay facilities fees for athletics and a bunch of other fees in addition to my tuition, and I feel like, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, if we were faced with that, students would say, or at least I would say, well, I guess we have no other option. The building's gonna fall down or we're gonna have to pay for it, and we don't wanna be blamed for that. So, I mean, stop building new buildings if it comes to that. But if this is such a priority, even if it's a last resort, it shouldn't even be a resort. Putting that on the students in some way, it's just not fair.
It's just, I agree, and you know, the issue, though, is that we have primarily two sources of funding, tuition and the state. Certainly the donor funding is very important. Your first point also, I think, was really good in terms of thinking about investment in new facilities. The bar has got strategically, the bar should be pretty high before we start building new buildings, because we have to take care of what we have. I remember Chancellor Schrader was talking about, I guess, Wednesday in terms of the campus master planning going on, and what you found is that you actually have all the square footage you need. You may need to reconfigure it more strategically to meet your needs. So I think that's an excellent point. And that's one of the reasons why, just in this scenario, again, that we're putting forward, there really aren't new buildings on this list. It's tackling the existing issues where we get a pretty high return on investment.
Can I just make a comment in response to Amy? Amy brings up a valid point. Let me reemphasize what Tom said is the last possible thing that we want to look at is the one at the bottom, which is student facility fees. And we had this very healthy conversation yesterday about supplemental fees. Let me draw an analogy. This analogy comes from the Show Me Value tour. When I'm going to rural Missouri schools and I'm talking to the civic leaders about what's going on in their school, and I'm sharing with them statistics in terms of college going rates, dropouts, and other statistics, how many are eligible for free lunch. The comment is we're responsible for our schools. There are our schools. We get to determine the facility, the size of the facility, what the budget is. If we need more, we raise taxes. We raise taxes because we need more revenue, and we bond the building because it's a public institution that is necessary for our community. If you take that analogy up to the University of Missouri system, the University of Missouri system is an asset of the state of Missouri. Our mission suggests that we support all 6 million Missourians, and we provide a public service. When you take that analogy up to the state, are we increasing taxes? Are we getting the revenue source to keep these buildings up to date? I don't know of an example in local schools where they tax the families that are sending just their kids to those schools. It is a community service. The situation that we've got right now is what is unavoidable, and we always have to look at how we can more efficiently use the existing space, and that's more online programs, more freedom and flexibility and use of classrooms, more sections going at night, going on weekends. We've got to keep pulling these levers, but the facts are the facts. We have buildings that are falling down, and having a classroom, and specifically a lab, and many of these applied learning experiences you can't simulate online. You have to do, and the project works as well, it has to be done in a lab or a classroom environment. The facts is we're going to have to step up to that, and the purpose of this is to call out the need right now for further discussion, because we've got to find out development dollars, do what we can in terms of state funding, be it 50-50, bonding, whatever, and the last possible, and I will repeat again, the last possible lever we should pull is that one on the bottom, which is student facility fees. I agree with you 100%.
That's really, again, just to start the discussion and continue the discussion, and happy to answer any other questions.
Tom, going back to, I'll show you, this, your list of critical, we got $35 million worth of critical needs. We're not going to, how much of that are we going to be able to address?
I think certainly the campuses have ongoing budgets, and I think the issue is, Gary, feel free to join in if I miss this. The limited dollars that we have really are becoming more almost exclusively targeted at addressing critical needs. So after your roof starts to leak, then you spend your money fixing the leak and sort of repairing the damage. Optimally, you'd like to tackle that roof right before it starts to leak. And so that's sort of another problem that we're facing, is that the limited dollars that we have are going all into the critical needs of what's the crisis today in a building, and that doesn't allow for any strategic investment or more of the kinds of things that are preventative in nature, which will prevent problems from growing.
Understood. But my question is, are we going to be able to do the whole 35?
Yeah, and I'm just kind of sort of thinking through the data. That's sort of the summary of the 1,500 buildings. So on each of the campuses, they're, you know, closer to the ground. They're aware of the issues that are coming up, the actual issues. And this is based on the studies that would suggest what things need to be addressed.
Because my assumption is that out of that 186, next year, some percentage of that will be red.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That 35, how much of that is not covered in this $200 million proposal here?
We'd have to get data on this. Again, this is an aggregation of 1,500 buildings. We do have all the data underneath it, actually, but I can't, off the top of my head, tie that together.
Is most of that 35 in here, or not much of it, or? I know it's an apples and oranges comparison. But
right.
This is your highest priority of buildings that need renovation.
Based on the strategic criteria.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that those are the very worst buildings in a vacuum that need to be addressed, but strategically.
I understand that, but about how much of the 35 is embedded in here somewhere?
I can't answer that specific. We can figure that out.
Okay, the second column that adds up to 218 million, how does that differ from the first column? I'm on this page of your high priorities. Or is that additional 218 above the first 200 million?
So I think part of that, again, it's probably a number of factors, but in some cases, what we're proposing here is, again, just sort of sized investments. They're not addressing all the needs. The best example is probably Benton Stadler at the bottom. Just based on the sizing of this conceptual program, we allocated $35 million, but the need in the building is much greater.
Is that the case with any of the others?
It depends on, you know, the nature, the project. I'm just kind of looking down. You know, School of Medicine renovation at UMKC, similarly, the need there is about $42 million, but $19 million had been allocated. Again, approaching it from the standpoint that how do we come up with sort of a pool of resources, allocate it to the campuses, and then do what you can with it.
Well, it seems to me if you're going to, if these are the highest priority buildings that need pretty much total renovation right now, on all of them, we ought to do whatever it takes to do it, because otherwise it gets put off another 20 years and you never get back to it. So I would say if you're going to do that, do them all right at this point.
Yeah, and I certainly would agree, and it just comes back to the resources available. And in some sense, we could wait until we have the resources to do everything, but what if that's 5 years from now?
Yeah, but you can't, a lot of these cases.
So like in the case of the School of Medicine, they're already starting a phased renovation of that building. So it's kind of thinking about what are the resources we have and how can we best put them to use. Even if we can't get everything done, as long as we're doing something that's strategic and it puts us on the path, is that better than doing nothing?
Okay. Now, another question, and I appreciate what the president said about not putting on students, but just for comparison's sake, what was the total amount of the student fees that we approved day before yesterday? What did that add up to?
In aggregate?
The total number of those additional fees, new fees outside of tuition and today's fees.
Oh, Curator, from memory, I'm thinking maybe the MU component might have been
3.3 million for
Three-
the two new fees and that we proposed.
And so with S&T, so I'd say, let's just say $5 million.
So about, okay, so more than what it would take to fund these projects that we have before us, which you said was like $340 a student going forward, 350.
Well, the annual debt service, you know, again, on this hypothetically $18 million.
Yeah,
So when we show a fee of $300, that would, again, generically be across all students.
and the total aggregate money raised by the fees we passed Wednesday was what again?
I would estimate about $5 million for the incremental amounts that we talked about.
5 million annually. Okay,
So that does provide some perspective.
okay.
So
Well, we've known we've had a big problem here for a long time, and it gets bigger every year. Legislature doesn't want to pass the bond issue, which is, I mean, even if we got half of what's proposed this year, that's $300 million. And, you know, that's a good start. But you need that, plus you need this 50-50 match going forward. And I question whether or not we ought to start building any more buildings until we do this first. And I think, but building proposals get approved and come to us as a higher priority than this. And I don't know that that's, you know, what we ought to be doing as opposed to fixing this, at least fixing these first. Now, we can't fix the big picture. That's going to take a lot more than what we get. I don't think you're going to get the legislature to appropriate, you know, an extra whatever $1 million a year as a revenue stream for us to pay off our bonds, you know, when they won't pass their own bonds and do that. And they're looking at tax cuts instead of tax increases. I mean, this is almost an insurmountable problem, short of taking care of most of it internally.
Well, let me, I think Amy had a great point, and, you know, there's all sorts of options, and I appreciate the president's statement, and I think we all agree with that the last thing we want to do is increase student fees. But we had a great discussion yesterday about private giving in this state, and I know for a fact, being an alumni of our law school, that our law alums pitched in greatly to build a new building here on the Columbia campus years ago. And I don't know why, for example, the engineering graduates wouldn't be willing, given the heritage of that of their education here, to dig deeper than they've ever dug before to support renovation of the engineering school. I mean,
It's not just a large, major, single-time gift thing either. It's something that all those small gifts can go into.
Right. So there are options, and I think we have to explore all the options before we have any discussion about student fees. And I think that's what the president's saying.
Isn't there a bright line between renovation? Well, first of all, there's a line between repair and maintenance and renovation. So you've presented us with renovations. It's a little easier to support a new building than it is a renovation, and more easy to support renovation than repairing a roof. And I'm interested in the extent to which the legislature is going to grade us on what we bring to them for the 50-50 match. It's a great program, but we haven't seen their reaction to it yet. And it seems to me that we ought to see what they do with what we're proposing, which is largely new buildings. Even if we can do some renovations, will they be acceptable? Will they, like many of our donors, be more attracted to new buildings? I happen to agree with our former legislature that we ought to take care of business before we build a bunch of new buildings. On the other hand, isn't that a dilemma when we end up asking for the legislature for approval? Or do they get it, and are they going to help us with renovations as well as new buildings? I don't know. I'm curious, and I see Steve isn't here, but I think that would be good to discuss.
Well, let me say this. Different legislatures now, they're not even willing to raise money to do anything, for the most part. But the legislature historically has looked at major renovations where you come out with essentially a new building on an old foundation and walls in the same category as building a new building. Now donors, maybe not as much, but I think when you do a major renovation like most of these, you end up with basically a new building, and I think people realize that. But lack of willingness to do that, even with the 50-50 match, which passed 3 years ago, and it's one of those easy bills to pass because it doesn't cost anything at that point, but then do you ever fund it? And it's hard to fund it when you can't generate revenue and you don't want to generate revenue. So, and you won't take, free revenue like the Medicaid, or Medicaid money.
I just want to add to that. One of the things we need to really think about, though, is this idea of repurposing a building. For example, we was talking about new construction versus renovation. Lafferty Hall, for example, has a very large research component to it. To renovate research space like Lafferty Hall costs a lot more per square foot than to build new. So one of the thoughts is you need to take a look at space and say, okay, we want to repurpose this space that needs to be renovated, but repurpose it for something else, and then look at another location and say, well, maybe we need to build new there, or build an addition onto an existing building. So it's not just a simple matter of just like renovating for the exact same purpose. That's what this Lafferty Hall project is about. You may have noticed in your capital plan the last few years, that building has been a $110 million project. Well, we decided we were going to concentrate on undergraduate enrollment for that particular building, and that brought it down to $32 million, and then we're going to try to repurpose other space for research. So it's very complicated, but you have to be strategic in all those uses. It's not just simple renovation for like use.
Well, I know, but when you take a building like this engineering building on the Red Campus, you're not going to tear it down and leave a hole there. And if you were to build a building that fit the architectural needs of the campus, it would probably cost, pretty much.
It does cost more.
Right, and you're not going to go out and build it way off somewhere else. So as a practical matter, it's renovating, there's not much options other than to renovate that particular building.
Correct.
It's not the case on all buildings, but that's one where you don't really much of a choice. And if you don't do anything, it just, gets worse and worse, costs more and more.
Can I make a point with a couple of halls that I'm familiar with? We wouldn't have had a new law school if the law alumni hadn't gathered funds and essentially put it to the legislature before you had a 50-50 match. We've got all this money, and you can't really renovate Tate Hall enough to be a modern law school. And the same way, I think, with the business school, that I think that there was a major fundraising campaign for the new business school. Renovating, Middlebush Hall wouldn't have been, wouldn't have taken us to the next level with our business school. And again, it has partly to do with the attractiveness to alumni of supporting a project. Now we've got a mechanism that the legislature has approved in principle where there's a formality to what we've been doing anyway. But I hope that they accept renovations as part of that mechanism.
Any other questions or comments for Tom on this particular topic?
I just think when we build a new building, what did you say, Gary, before? We should have 1 to 1.5% of that building's cost put in our budget as for maintenance of that? 1.5%, 2%. So if we're going to build a new building, let's put 1.5%, 2% in the budget for maintaining it.
That's a good idea.
If we're going to build one.
So again, just to reintroduce the topic really again, how do we solve it? It's all of the above. I think the key thing is that we have to formulate a strategy that's very intentional going forward. And focus on this continuously, and then this will tie in also, we're going to go over future committee agenda items, but in April we'll talk again about debt capacity. those resources, that ties into this whole discussion in terms of making very strategic decisions given our limited resources. But certainly it's the state, it's our donors, alumni, and to some extent, it's going to have to be our own resources that we find to support this need.
Thank you, Tom. That was very informative and thought-provoking. And we're ready, I think, to move on to the next item.
Did you want to cover the other info item or optometry?
Optometry.
The action item on the agenda today is to revisit the UMSL optometry building project. I just wanted to give a broad overview. We presented this, again, actually Chancellor George presented this at the November meeting. Just as an overview of the project itself and what's before the committee and the board, and then I'm going to ask Chancellor George to come up and just give an update on some campus actions and developments with this project. But to highlight the points, they're all in your board materials. It's a $17 million project for clinical patient space, $12 million proposed funding with debt, and $5 million from School of Optometry reserves. The debt service would be about $780,000 a year. 56% of that roughly would be through internal reallocations of the school's own budget, and then about 44% provided by a student fee. This action item that's before you would include the imposition of the student fee, which again we discussed at the November meeting. As a reminder, again, 99% of the eligible students voted in an election and 79% voted to approve the fee. When the fee is fully implemented, it will be $1,800 per year per student. Buildings, 48,000 square feet, 35,000 would be for this clinical patient care space, and 13,000 square feet will be shell space, and the campus and the school is targeting leasing out that space. And I'd just say, for the sake of conservatism, the financial projections that you show do not include rental income from that shell space. So hopefully that would be additive to the project. We've looked at the debt service in terms of the school's ability to handle it. They do meet the required debt service ratio with a reallocation of funds from the campus to help support the project. And with that, I'll let Chancellor George give an update on where those discussions have gone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for this opportunity to talk once again about the proposed optometry building. I am delighted that this comes on the heels of the discussion we just had. We've got major problems on the campus. That's very clear. Our FC&I index is over 0.4, and we're developing a 10 to 15-year plan to address that. Let me mention that some of the elements of that plan. For example, we are building a new science building. It is a new building, but we're doing that because we want to be able to go into the current Benton-Stadler complex and renovate it. So out of our own hide, we're taking $2 million a year for bond payments so that that enables us to go into the complex that currently is there and do the proper renovation. We have raised private dollars for a proposed business building. Hopefully we'll get the 50-50 match. That's not going to be bonding. This has not put on the table as bonding. We've already bonded for a new wellness recreation center, overtaxed in the Mark Twain building. And every new facility that we're doing helps to bring down the FC&I index. We now have a College of Optometry which is stuffed into a facility that really was not designed to be a College of Optometry. It's a residence hall for nuns. It's worked, but really we can't go simply into that hall, renovate that, and have the kind of a facility we need to take us to the next level of our programmatic offerings and our teachings. The College of Optometry is starting to help itself. We have a $90 million dream. It's going to be a combination of optometry and nursing, and what we'd like to do is jumpstart that dream with this $17 million project. We feel that we can start the ball rolling with that. We feel that we can start getting donor interest in the rest of the phases, phase 2 and 3. This first phase is clinical. It's a combination of teaching and clinical, but it's something that the college is fully behind. The dean is here, faculty here. I think we have upwards of 12 students are here in case there's any specific questions that I cannot address, but this is sorely needed, certainly for our college, but it fits in with our overall strategic planning, and certainly if you look at this facility, where we're going to place it. It deals with community engagement. It deals with academic programmatic development, the UMSL experience. It hits all three of our themes in our strategic plan. And with that, I'll stop. Thanks. Oh, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. We did take this to our campus governing bodies. There's two associated with this. The University Assembly, which includes our faculty senate and also student representation and staff representation, has a facilities committee. And this was taken to that committee. They unanimously voted in favor of this, and they were presented with also the operating fee. That was just brought up just before in the earlier discussion. It would cost upwards of $490,000 a year to operate the building. If it gets approved, it would be built, this would be from about 2017 on. And then we took it to the Budget and Planning Committee. The Budget and Planning Committee turned this thing inside and out. It was a very heated discussion. When the vote was taken, it was 10-0-1. And the one abstention, I believe, was simply the faculty member felt that we should be putting more dollars into faculty positions and not into issues like M&R and new buildings. But thanks for mentioning that, Tom.
Is the plan, the old building, the present building, which was a dormitory for nuns historically, about a 50-year-old building, I would think, built after World War II from the looks of it. Is the plan to tear that down?
At some stage, yes. We're not ready to do that because we're going to use that space probably for some aspects of the College of Education and some other ways, and we're going to fix that up. At some stage, yes, Wayne. I've got a list here of buildings we want to tear down in the next several years, probably 2 to 3 years. That's not on them. Normandy, St. Agnes, Parking and Transportation Building, the Alumni Center, RCEW, and our Postal Services Building. That's 5 complexes in the next 2 years we would like to tear down. This is probably in the next maybe 10 years.
I have a couple to add to that.
Okay, fine. And I didn't put the Alumni House on there, not yet anyway.
That should take care of a big part of our maintenance and repair problem on that campus if we're tearing it all.
Oh, it does. No, I know it. We laugh, but it really does take care of. I mean, what we'd like to do in the next 10 years, our FC&I is still going to go up. You saw that projection of 0.558. I don't want to go, or 0.5. I don't want to go that high. So we'd like to keep it still in the low 0.4s. And by tearing down buildings, carefully building new buildings, like our science complex. We can't do renovation without building that building. You just can't take people in labs and put them out into tents.
Chancellor, could you talk just a little bit about the debt financing aspect of this in more specificity?
Sure.
You'd be asking to issue
Yeah.
new debt.
Yeah.
And could you be more?
Yeah, let me talk a bit more about it. Well, first of all, what we've designed for this, 48,000 square feet, of which 35,000 will be immediate clinical use and 13,000 for other uses that we could rent. Of that, $5 million comes right off the top of savings. And the College of Optometry has been doing this now for the last 10 years. They've been saving dollars. They're the only college that keeps its own tuition. So in a sense, they're sort of along this responsibility-centered management process. So that's $5 million off the top. That leaves us with then $12 million to finance. And what we've done is we've roughly divided into two. It's actually 45, 55%, where in one aspect of it, we're not filling 2 positions. One's an administrative type position, and another's a faculty position. And we're cutting back on scholarships. We now give over 25% of our tuition going into scholarships. Kind of the gauge for us is about 20%, so we'll still be above that 20%. And then the big one is the student fee, where the students themselves, by I think it was about 75% vote, voted to tax themselves with a fee that would kick in first at $450 a semester, and for the first year, the second year, $900 a semester, which comes out to about $1,800 a year. That's about 9% of the overall in-state resident tuition for someone in optometry.
Could I be really difficult with you for a minute and say hypothetical? With respect to this project, an issuance of this amount of debt alongside Benton Stadler, and you may say that's apples and oranges, Covington, don't even talk about it, but I said hypothetically. And that might ultimately require issuance of debt. And it would, I'm putting you on the spot, I understand, but at this point, using the conceptual plan criteria that Tom provided for us in his paperwork, where they would be focusing monies, basically. If it required more issuance of debt to get Benton Stadler off the bright red list, would you be able to tilt one way or another?
Well,
In terms of the number of students
I
served,
hear your
programs covered?
I hear your question. I mean, certainly the second phase of Benton Stadler, we're doing the first phase now. The second phase, which is about a $60 million phase. What Tom put up was $35 million, because that's not the whole answer. That would involve far more numbers of students, granted. What we're talking about here in optometry is I think the current enrollment's about 172 students. We anticipate that with these new facilities, we could probably get that number up to about 192, 193. So it certainly is more students. What we have here, though, is an opportunity. And it's only 12 million. I mean, it's not, we have an opportunity. The college and the students, the faculty have all come together to present the opportunity. And so, you know.
But all the debt is being financed by the student fee?
Of the 17 million, we get it down to 12 million that has to be financed as debt, and I think it's 45% is by the student fee out of that.
The rest is financed by?
Well, the other is by not filling 2 positions and taking scholarships down from about 25% to in the low 20% of the tuition collected.
We're not adding to university system debt?
Well, no. I mean,
System debt, but it's all allocated as
the only thing we're adding to, Curator Bradley, is that we have an operating cost of about $490K a year when the building starts in 2017, and we're going to find a way to get those funds. Dean Davis, did you want to?
What I wanted to share is just point out that this is a real-world example of what was in Mr. Richards' presentation. This is not our first choice. We started on this path in earnest about a decade ago in 2005. We thought we could renovate our building. After a long conversation with the architects, they came back and said renovation would cost as much or more than a new building. So then later on, a couple years later, we thought we'd be in the bonding issue. The first proposal, the bond issue with Chris Kelly and Steve Tilley at the time. That was not to be. The 50-50 match is not a good match for our program. We have about 1,100 alumni. We're not going to be able to raise millions of dollars with 1,100 alumni. So this is a different way of approaching a problem that fits our program, perhaps not the most desirable way to do it, but it is a practical way to get things done and moving, as the Chancellor said. So we believe it's critical. I think there's a number of folks that think that if this project doesn't go forward, that Missouri may not be among the 17 states that offer a doctor of optometry in a decade. You know, it's not going to happen immediately, but I think we're going to really have to consider this in the future if this is not something that moves forward. So I do appreciate the students' comment. We certainly didn't want to go down this path, but it was a way for us to get where we need to go.
Did you say the nursing students are in here as well?
Where we are on this project, the DREAM, the $90 million complex, is a nursing optometry complex. That would be the third phase.
Oh, they're not in this first phase?
No. In fact, they're not even in the second phase. It'd be the third phase.
Chancellor, I compliment you and the dean and the students, some of whom met with me in my office. And, you know, the process that has been followed, I think, has been the right way to do this. This is sort of the prototype of a classic way that I think if we're going to do supplemental fees, they should be done. It's a vital project to the campus. They have sought all alternative sources, including donors' support. They went to the students, and the students overwhelmingly support this in a vote. So I commend you and the dean on the process. Here is my concern. And this is really more of a question for Tom. This is $12 million in additional debt issuance by the system. And I know some of us, maybe most of us, have a concern about the tipping point on when we get to the point where we're at risk of lowering our overall credit rating. And Tom, I'd like you to address whether we are at risk if we go forward on this project with another $12 million in debt. Does that put us at risk? I know we're going to look at that issue more in detail in our April meeting. And if it does put us at risk, and I think this is a discussion I had with Chair Covington, is it possible, would it be feasible, would there be a serious issue if we delayed our consideration of this until the April meeting, till we know one way or the other whether this project is going to jeopardize our current credit rating?
So what I can answer, if the question in a vacuum is this project represent the tipping point to a potential credit downgrade? No. But it's not in a vacuum. That's the issue, is that it's in the context of the larger situation. When we brought debt capacity to the board last April, we had a list of projects that totaled $500 million. And the context of that discussion was, could we do these $500 million in projects and maintain our credit rating? That was the whole angle. And we felt fairly confident that we could do that. Again, there's no guarantee, and we've talked about that a lot. This wasn't on that list. Would that have materially changed the outcome of that discussion? Probably not. What I can say we're doing, and really at the request of the board, we're currently looking at debt capacity in total again, in aggregate, but also by campus. That's something that we haven't done before. We're working on that. We're going to bring it back to the board in April. I can't tell you what I think the debt capacity is of the St. Louis campus right now. I can tell you, again, we're working on it. I'm actually meeting with our partners at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Morgan Stanley, and Barclays, and our financial advisors. We're actually meeting next week to be working on this so we can bring back answers to the board. So in a vacuum, this project is not a tipping point in terms of our credit rating, but in the context of strategically overall, or specifically in the context of the campus's own debt capacity, I can't, I just don't have the data to provide for you on that.
We don't have the highest debt rating right now, our credit rating right now, do we?
Second highest.
We're a, what?
We're AA1.
What's the highest
AAA
rating?
is the highest. There's only a small handful of institutions in the nation that have a AAA rating. Most of our peers have probably more of a AA2. But that's a discussion we'll engage in at April when we bring the data back.
Just so everyone knows, and I think I've spoken with everybody about this, but if I haven't, I've asked Tom to let us know this year if there becomes a tipping point, that we as a board should have a discussion before we go over the tipping point, so that we go, we can debate it. There are pros and cons about retaining our current credit rating and or going down a notch depending on the importance of the particular project. So it's a weighing and balancing, but we need to have that discussion in advance of issuing debt, in my opinion, before we issue debt that's going to take us down a notch. So that's the discussion that I assume that's coming in April, right? So my question in light of that is for the Chancellor and for the Dean, is there a significant downside from your perspective if we waited and tabled this until the April meeting, until we had that information?
Well, I think timing is important. We all know that the economy is going to come back at some time. The cost of construction is going to go up. The ability to keep projects under budget is going to decrease as more construction happens. So I think that's one of the big concerns that I have. I also just want to speak to the momentum that we have. You know, the example in this room, there's a number of folks here that are really interested in this moving forward. One of the most complimentary letters I received just a couple days ago was from a 1988 graduate of our program. And he said, you know, this was needed when I was a student. And I believe I'm going to come forward and support it because it's important to do. And the reason it's a complimentary letter because his son is here with us today as a student. His cost is going to go up because of this project. Their family cost is going to go up. He still thinks it's something he wants to support personally and financially. I think that shows the impact of what we're doing here. It's an institutional pride, it's a reputation, and there's no more important thing that we can do for this college.
Don, is the
issue that we think we might be at the tipping point right now already, or?
Well, maybe I'm misinterpreting what Tom Richards is saying. He's saying if you look at it in a vacuum right now, he doesn't think we're at the tipping point. But when you put it in the context of everything else we're doing, he's not as certain. And it's an art and not a science that the rating agencies, the analysis they go through in determining when we hit that point. So, ideally, from my perspective, we would wait until April. But I hear what you're saying, that there's potential maybe significant increased construction costs that we don't, maybe not.
Well, maybe not 6 or 7 weeks from now. Surely not.
I don't know. Do you know for sure that the construction costs?
No, you can predict that for sure, but I think we know it's a dynamic environment out there.
How long, just a point of order, point of interest, how long are these supplementary fees going to be on these students? They go forever? That extra $450 a semester, does that go for?
We anticipate that there will be other needs out there after the bonds are paid off. It's a 30-year
30
payoff.
years.
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years, right. Yeah.
So, and it'll be a much smaller impact on the total cost at that point.
That's forever for us.
I'd like to hear Tom clarify his remarks. I thought I heard him say that we know we have the $500 million that we've been talking about, and that $12 million is not going to push us over the tipping point. Is there going to be anything in those considerations between now and April that we expect to change, or is it simply a matter of discussion of that? And so I'd be interested in your views on that. There are other factors that we're going to deal with in April that may or may not affect our bond ratings. I think we ought to assume that we won't do other things that will affect our bond rating, but most importantly, I'd be interested in what the system's recommendation is at this point. And looking to Tim, I think that the system, are you making a recommendation that we go forward with this with the understanding that what Tom's just said with respect to whether this would be a tipping point for us?
I'm making a recommendation to go forward with this project.
One thing I wanted to add in beyond the debt, and of course this is all extraordinarily complicated, and there is no right black and white answer. But again, I think the reference to the earlier presentation, as we have these kinds of needs, we're going to need to be getting very creative. I mean, and I admire the creativity of this proposal to try to get something together that could work. And on some level, these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to be dealing with to tackle all the projects. And each project's going to be different. There'll be different solutions that might work. So from that standpoint, aside from the debt issue, I mean, it is an admirable approach in trying to get something done proactively to make an impact consistent with what is the campus's strategic plan.
Tom, I agree with what you said. I agree with what the dean said. Like I said, this was done in the right way for the right reasons with the right process. I'm not critical in any way of any of that, and in particular, I enjoyed hearing from the students on this one. But let me go back to the question that I raised and that John teed up again, just to make sure I'm hearing you clearly. If this was our last debt issuance for the next several years, are you comfortable that our credit rating is not going to be affected by this and this alone if we approved it today?
Yeah, I think, again, the comment in a vacuum, no other considerations, no other projects in the pipeline. I mean, is this project, this approval of $12 million in additional debt, is this going to push us over the edge? No, it will not. It's the context of everything else.
So if we do additional debt issuances, that might, but not this one. That's what I just want to make sure I'm clear.
And it depends on how you want to think through it. I mean, this project by itself, the board approving this debt will not push us to a AA2 rating.
Let me try and help Tom, though he doesn't really need the help. But this one won't push us over the edge, but that's grounded in the assumptions that the current financials don't change. The current health, the financial health of the University of Missouri system keeps us at a AA1. But what Tom says is appropriate. If things change, and there's a lot of things that change on a daily basis, that could change that picture tomorrow. But as of today, if those assumptions hold true, Is that fair?
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Further questions for either Chancellor George or Vice President Richards? Any discussion further? Then I will, did you want to say something?
Oh, no, no.
The motion, if there is one, would be to approve this project and the supplemental student fee for the optometry and nursing building project Phase 1, optometry clinic for the University of Missouri St. Louis, the supplemental student fee of $450 semester to be charged to each student enrolled in the College of Optometry beginning with fall of 2014. This fee would increase to $900 per semester per student once construction begins. That is the content of a motion, if there is one.
And so it takes a committee member to move.
Yes.
I'm on that committee, I'll make that motion.
I would second the motion. I have misgivings about this form of financing, but the older I get, the more I appreciate my optometrist. So.
Any further discussion before calling for the committee vote?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
You have all committee votes in favor.
Mr. Chairman, so moved to the full board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please call the roll.
Curator Bradley?
Yes.
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Downing?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Ponder?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
All right, our third item, which should not take very long, because we've already put some thought into this, haven't we? Proceed, thanks.
Let me say one thing. Chair Covington never apologizes, Chair of the Finance Committee, for going over your allotted time, because I've done that consistently for 3 years. No apology needed.
Maybe we need to extend the
Except
allotted time.
except to Curator Bradley.
So this is just a view of the ordinary items and then some special items we know that are coming up. But these would be ordinary things that would come before the Finance Committee on a regular cycle every year. But I would say that when we looked through, and Curator Covington and I went through the list of agenda items for the past year, I would say about 1/3 of the agenda items are recurring and normal, and 2/3 are ad hoc issues that come up before the committee, be it building projects, debt issuances, et cetera. So this is just the routine stuff. In April, we'll be presenting you with the FY15 operating budget. We've already talked about the debt capacity coming back. Physical facilities quarterly report, and Curator Downing, I'd mentioned this to Curator Covington. This is a report that we send out quarterly as soon as it's done to the board. We've kept it on the board agenda, but we never end up discussing it, so we end up sending it out to curators twice. That might be just a question to ask. We're going to be presenting something on the GASB changes in the accounting for pension plans, and we've discussed that previously. We're going to bring back actual numbers to the board to show the impact on our financials at June 30th of 2014. And then also the effectiveness and efficiencies report. This is revisiting some of the issues that curators had asked us to address, and this kind of goes back to some of the public press articles and costs in higher ed and things of that nature, and we're already working on that, providing some information to you in April. At June, and again, normally we review the preliminary operating appropriations requests and capital requests for the state. I think in terms of the capital requests, in light of this discussion that we started today previously, we're going to want to probably change the focus of that and our approach and our thinking on what we bring to the board to make sure it's realistic and strategic. Physical facilities quarterly report again appears. We approved the operating budget at the June meeting. In the July meeting, which is usually, I guess, the conference call or telepresence, we approved the state appropriations request. In October, we review the financial results of FY14. We do our annual investment performance review, and then we have the annual approval of the investment consultant. December, we start all over again reviewing tuition and other fees. And again, I think we made some significant improvements to that process this year despite the 4 days of meetings in a row, and we'll figure out a way to make that go even better for next year. The other topics that are on the list that we know we want to tackle is asset allocation. We're due to revisit that. And then also we know that we'll have a debt issuance sometime later in this fall. Again, this is debt for projects that have already been approved. We financed about 50% of those last fall, and we'll be coming back later in the year for the remainder of the financing. So those are the things that we sort of know about for sure. And then in addition, we have the things that come up almost at every meeting related to miscellaneous projects.
Tom, why are we waiting till fall for the rest of the debt issuance if rates go up or may go up?
So part of the strategy in managing the debt portfolio was to put more variable rate debt into the portfolio for strategic reasons that we can certainly get into. And so with that in mind, and not wanting to borrow all the money up front and sit on it and pay interest while it's just sitting earning zero, we delayed that financing. And because it's variable rate debt, it really doesn't matter where the market rates are because we'll be paying the variable rate.
Would anyone at this point, this moment, very moment, want to add anything to the list? If not, we can all wait.
I have a suggestion. We moved to a online agenda and look for the meetings. One of the things I'd suggest is right behind the page where we put the charge for each committee, we kind of put this annual, the things we know occur at the meetings going forward, and a couple pages right behind that.
Great
suggestion. I think that would be helpful to everybody. The other thing, I think we need to make a renewed effort to get all this extra stuff in the budget book. And I don't think it's a problem with the curator's office. I think it's a problem that it doesn't get generated quickly enough or timely enough by those who have to generate it to the budget, to the curator's office, so it can get in the budget book. But it would be good to have this material in there so we can see it ahead of time. Now, I know we're not ever going to get there 100%, but it seems like we worked up where we're getting it more and more in there, and now we're kind of drifting the other way where there's more and more coming back that isn't in there.
When you say the budget book, is that?
I don't mean the budget book. I
Curator,
mean the board.
mailing?
I'm board
So
book.
you're actually wanting us to get you the charts before we actually make the presentation?
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
We will
Yeah,
do
and you
that.
can't always do it, but as to the greatest extent possible.
I appreciate
And I think the gap is between the people that have to get this ready, which
Yeah.
isn't easy,
Yeah.
and getting it to Cindy when she's got to cut it off and get it done.
Fair.
Are most of these highlighted in the summary, though? So, yeah.
The words, but not the charts. And
Charts.
the further level of detail that Wayne's looking for, I got it.
Curator Covington or Curator Downing, I just wanted to raise that facilities quarterly report. We had talked about that before, whether we wanted to have that continuing on the agenda. We send the report out in advance, and we always have it on the agenda, but we never discuss it. But it's just the feeling of the committee whether we continue that or not.
I personally think just providing it, not making it an agenda item, and if people want to raise issues about it,
Certainly.
they can. Because you're right, we rarely have a discussion about it because I'm assuming curators review it and it looks appropriate, and so unless somebody else has a different view, yeah.
I just, let's put that through the information test, as if the information is surprising and we're going to take action on it that leads to some positive result, it's worthy of reporting. If it's not, and we're not talking about it, we're not seeing any changes, I'm not sure that's the quarterly frequency is appropriate.
All right with everyone?
But I'm just posing that to the board. We will do we all serve at the pleasure of the board, but if the board continues to want to read it on a quarterly basis, we'll continue to provide it, but if there isn't anything surprising in there, then maybe less frequent, because it takes work to put this together.
Is there a consensus for annual or semi-annual or annual with?
How about annual? How about annual?
You'll let us know if something is burning. Otherwise,
Annual sounds good to me.
annual's good. Well, that's.
One other item I would suggest, Chair and Tom, is someplace, and I'm not suggesting what meeting we talk about this, but I'd like an update and a report on, I know you're making progress on our management fees for our endowment fund, and all of our funds. And I'd just like a progress report. I think last year we had a meeting where we learned there were about $22 million in management fees we were paying, and just want to see how we're progressing. So whatever you think the appropriate time period for that report, I'd like to have it.
Yeah, we've certainly got good things to report. So,
Any other recommendations for topics for this coming year? Of course, this is fluid, and I repeat, everybody's happy to hear from everyone as things come to mind. If there is nothing further, Tom, thank you very, very much. And is there a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee?
So move.
Second.
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Good? Curator Phillips?
Aye.
All votes in favor.
Before we go into the audit committee, would people like to stretch their legs for a few minutes? Let's reconvene in about 10 minutes. Next item on the agenda is our audit committee meeting. Chair Hendrickson?
Yes, we have 3 information items today and only 1 action item. And our first information item is our internal audit quarterly report from Jan31 from Price Waterhouse.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today, I've got 5 reports to cover with you. We've also got 4 other reports that we're in the process of, and 4 other ones that we've drafted, and 5 other ones that we're in the process of. Do we have maybe the next slide? Am I driving here? Yeah. One more, please. Thanks. So here are the 5 that we want to cover today. The first 2 are departmental audits. One is the College of Nursing in St. Louis. The second one is School of Nursing and Health Studies in Kansas City. The next 2 are data analytic reports that I'll go through. One's around payroll, one's around purchasing card transactions. And the 5th report that I want to cover today is over at the health system around non-employment physician contracting. So on our next page, we've got the College of Nursing in UMSL. So in fiscal year 13, this college had a budget of $7.4 million and served 1,000 students. The scope of our work included activity in fiscal years 12 and 13. Our first recommendation was for management to ensure new fiscal personnel complete relevant training prior to their to perform their job responsibilities. This will help ensure that the newly hired staff are properly educated on the relevant processes that they need to go through and the university policies and procedures. The next 2 recommendations related to improving monitoring of financial activity. We've asked that they develop some clear expectations to be established around the monitoring of financial results, the budgets, the forecasts, and that those plans be adhered to going forward. And our last recommendation dealt with cash receipts process, specifically around segregation of duties and the timely recording of deposits and record keeping. So I'll move on to my second audit, which is...
Excuse me,
Yep.
let me ask you about the first one. This ensure new fiscal personnel complete relevant training. Are the funds that they're dealing with, are any of those funds Medicaid or Medicare funds?
I don't know the answer for this one. I'll look in the back if we do or not. So what I would say to you, Curator Downey, I don't know the answer, and we'll get you that. I'll give you context around the comment. In this particular situation, it was a new fiscal officer that had some pretty good knowledge of what they needed to do, but we didn't see the rigor that we would hope to see around the fiscal officer training.
and we thought that that would be something that every new fiscal officer should go through. So I know that doesn't answer your question, but I just want to give you context around the comment.
Now, I realize, and maybe it's more of a minor issue, but if they're dealing with Medicaid and Medicare funds, it can be a significant issue. And so we've got to obviously take extra caution to comply with federal law, the way those funds are handled. So just, if you would, check into that.
I will. Thank you. So our second audit is the School of Nursing and Health Studies at UMKC. This has 50 staff and 70 faculty members serve a current student body of approximately 1,700 within the school, and their fiscal year 2013 revenues were $11 million. The scope of this work included activity in fiscal years 2012, 2013, and part of 2014. Our first recommendation was for management to improve the cash receipts process by reducing the amount of time from the time they get the collection to the time of the deposit, given their distributed process right now. Our second recommendation was for management to improve compliance with university procurement policies with a specific focus around reviewing procedures, maintaining documentation, and using the preferred method of purchase, which is the Show Me Shop. Our third recommendation was for management to establish a formalized budget review process to allow for greater transparency throughout the school and assist management in decision-making. And our fourth and final recommendation was for management to improve the timeliness of the payment processing and the recording of some internal transfers. I'll move on to, those are our two departmental audits. I'd like to move on to the next two. These both take the nature of data analytics. Several years ago, as we looked at our internal audit process and how we get good coverage across the university, one of the things we really wanted to do was to leverage the investment that the university makes into technology. So instead of going into a department or just a business process, we started to look at all of the data across a function, across all of the systems. So the next two will fall into that category. The first one is around payroll, again, system-wide. So the system-wide central payroll office collaborates with the campus payroll and the accounting offices to design and implement policies and procedures around the internal controls. The total salaries and expense are around $1.3 billion, and our audit scope covered fiscal year 2012 and 2013. So in our approach, we took all of the data for the payroll, which was both regular payroll and overtime payroll, et cetera, and we looked for anomalies and errors. We did such things as we looked for off-cycle payments, we looked for excessive overtime, we looked for ghost employees, we looked for payments to employees that were not in the master file, and we looked for duplicate payments. And then we went in and we did specific testing of transactions that covered 220 departments across the university system. So normally when I'm up here and I cover an audit report, I say the audit report and then I say some of the findings. One of the things I really want to say about this is a well-controlled area across the university. I have a couple of recommendations that we've shared with them that I'll share with you. The university has invested heavily in the technology. It's a key area, payroll. There are things that happen for overtime pay. This is a well-controlled area with good internal controls. I just wanted to point that out to the board. So we have two recommendations here. Really, they're around categorization and record keeping of transactions. One is PeopleSoft is the technology they use to transact the payroll. One is to eliminate some of the functionality, which is currently unused. That just tightens up the control. And another area was to improve some controls around employee leave processes. But again, this was an area that has very good internal controls, as you would expect. I think the test proved that. So I'll move on to the fourth internal audit, which is around purchasing card transactions. The P-card program is utilized to increase efficiencies and regarding routine purchases and payments. During fiscal year 13, approximately $100 million was spent across the system through the P-card program. You'll recall a similar project we did on the 2012 audit plan. The scope of this work covered October 1, 2012 through July 31, 2013. And again, we use data analytic tools to evaluate the entire population of the purchasing card transactions, and then we did individual testing for compliance with policy. Using our approach, we tested transactions from 123 different departments. Some examples of what we looked for when we aggregated the data were personal transactions, gift card transactions, transactions that occurred on holidays or weekends, And then we went in and did tests specific to some of those kind of higher risk things that we might apply. It's important to note that the university has a P-card redesign effort underway, and that this includes the evaluation of P-card limits, compliance with university preferred method of payment, and appropriateness of policies. We had 2 recommendations here in our testing. Again, the individual testing showed very good results compliant with university policies. We had 2 recommendations here. The first one was as an employee goes on a leave of absence or terminates their employee, we've asked for a tighter control of turning off the P-card upon their termination as part of the HR offboarding process, if you will. And the second one related to stringing of purchases. This is when one individual can record a transaction with two cards, so 2 employees covering 1 transaction. We can see that when we do our data analytics. I think the root cause was, so there's two comments to make. One is we've asked for the appropriate management to go back and understand the details of all the individual transactions so they can communicate with the employees. The second thing, I think the root cause is oftentimes the limit is not sufficient, and the individual that was going to spend the money didn't actually get go through the policy to get the waiver for an approval prior to spending it. So I think part of that will be cured in the redesign. Part of that is cured through training of if you need to spend more than your limit, ask in advance and we can get that to you. I'll go on to our 5th and final audit, which was non-employment physician. Yes?
Let me ask a question before you go off the purchase card. Do you check, it would be on a sampling basis, I guess, but to try to make sure that the supervisor or whoever it is over the person using the card adequately looks at those as approval process?
For the transactions we pick, we do look to see that an independent party reviewed the transaction, yes.
And does the university sufficiently emphasize the need for that to happen, and is that, well established across the board?
I think the policy's clear. I think we've talked to Tom about how could you improve the process, and I think that what Tom's looking at as part of this redesign is the assignment of the person that does the review. So I think by and large it's pretty good. It's hard to test 100%, and I know you said the word sampling, about the substantive, how substantive of a review they did. Say in general, as we've inquired, you can see that they are doing it and they're doing a check of the review. I think that as we look across the design, Tom may have some improvements in terms of how to get to the right assignments. And I think that's something that gets looked at from time to time.
I think that's really important to
too.
emphasize. If I remember correctly, that was part of the problem, and that situation came up in Kansas City, but I'm sure it happens other places too.
Yeah, you're exactly right around that. And we've had that conversation both with President and with Tom. Thank you for that. So I'll go on to the 5th item, which is non-employment physician contracting. These are physician contracts which are initiated either within the University of Missouri Healthcare or within the University School of Medicine, but the processes and parties responsible for managing these contracts are a little bit different between the 2 units. Again, our audit looked at the health system. The purpose of the audit was to identify university contracts with physicians and assess if the contracts were current, properly documented, and in compliance with university policy. Our scope was fiscal year 2013. We had 2 recommendations here. One was for management to implement a process to identify, track, and monitor the physician contracts, to allow management to account for and monitor the physician contracts to help ensure that they're current, paid according to contract terms, and have been properly approved. I think what we're looking for is maybe an improved business process in this area that's a little more consistent between the 2 groups that I talked about. The first step is to identify the contracts with the physician interest, as management currently doesn't have a way to segregate those contracts from non-physician contracts. And then the second item was for management to establish a central repository to keep these contracts, maintain them, and oversee that process. So those will conclude my comments on the 5 audits, and I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Our other two information items are the Ethics and Compliance Hotline Annual Report and a review of the university's Code of Conduct, and Interim Vice President Richards will review those for us.
Okay, just quickly to go over the Ethics and Compliance Hotline Annual Report. The report is in your materials. I don't have any slides on this topic. Just as a reminder, we maintain the hotline. It was started out for reporting on financial fraud. It was later expanded to cover medical health issues, human resources, research, athletics, environmental health, and safety. It's run by a third party in a way that ensures anonymity for those that request it in terms of the reporting process, which is a key part of getting people to make these kinds of reports. Just wanted to highlight some of the data just to point out on page info 2-2, I just want to make a comment on the increasing reporting trends that you'll see specifically for the health system, and just to put some context around that. The health system had previously run its own hotline separate from this, and then somewhere around 2011, we really merged them together, and then the health system has been encouraging through promotion within the system with its employees, et cetera, the use of the hotline. And so we would actually expect the number of reported reports to go up because that's a sign that we're sort of making known that the hotline exists. One of the things I wanted to mention again, and we're going to bring this back to the board most likely in April, just as an aside, we've been working with PwC on a review of the finance function, and we happen to do a survey of fiscal officer type people throughout the system. We had 500 survey responses to that. One of the things that we found is that 30% of those people were unfamiliar with the Ethics and Compliance Hotline. So I'm just throwing that out as in the context of this report. We've got some work to do in terms of training and education to reintroduce that, as you will, or I'm sure as we have employees turnover, but that certainly will be a focus of ours. Page 2-3 just gives a sense of what the initial reports were. And then maybe just to summarize on page 2-4 at the bottom with the bullet points, of the reports that we got in, just as an example for this past year, on 18% of the reports, we really had issues where appropriate action was taken. And one thing I just mentioned, again, for context, when these reports come in from the third party, they go to my office and they go to the Office of General Counsel concurrently, and we work with OGC on resolving all these to the very end. So about 18% required action, roughly 38% were investigated, but no action was deemed necessary. 6% or 5 reports, there wasn't enough information to go on. There was an open records request that went to the hotline, and then there were just questions about where they would go for information. There are 19 reports that are still pending. Most of those are in the health system, and we're currently working with the compliance function in the health system to get those cleared up. So that's just sort of an annual overview to let the board know that this is in place. We will be taking steps, as the health system is on its end, to continuously publicize and educate our people and students about the availability of this resource.
Tom, I'm glad you addressed the dramatic increase in hotline reports about the health system. And do you believe the fact that they're now promoting it more explains all of that, or is there some other issue there that we need to be focused on?
That is absolutely a piece of it. And then the other thing, again, there's been sort of a transition of directing issues away from what the health system had on its own previously and directing them to this. If you look at both the old reporting methodology and this, I'm not sure that you would see that kind of growth. But this is not a bad thing, seeing the number of incidents reported, because we're trying to get people to report. And again, not all of them prove to be issues that require attention, but we want people to know it's out there, and they can feel free to report in a way that keeps themselves anonymous.
I assume when you have the number of reports that we've had the last couple of years there, you're looking for trends, patterns, things like that, as opposed to whether they're just isolated instances?
Yeah, and again, there's sort of a table on page 2-3, which just sort of gives the kinds of general topics that are reported. And I'd say those are fairly consistent from year to year.
As part of the appropriate action that was taken, and I think you said about 17% of them that needed action taken, these are some serious categories. or any of them referred for criminal prosecution?
Nilofer, can we, sorry, I can't.
I'm not asking about any identities.
Yeah, I think we can get that information for you, and we might want to talk to the Office of General Counsel.
Okay. Okay.
I was going to ask, in that similar vein, you had 18%, but just 16 complaints where appropriate action was taken. Appropriate action, aside from criminal prosecution, would that be training, correction, termination?
It could be all of the above, depending on the circumstance and the severity of the circumstance. I mean, even, where action would need to be taken, that could be across the broad spectrum of something that just needs to be addressed to a more serious issue. But the reason, in terms of how this is structured and having the accountability with the Vice President of Finance and the Office of General Counsel, is that we work together to make sure that each incident that comes into the hotline is resolved. And we don't let go of those until there's been agreement that they've been resolved appropriately.
Thank you. Any further questions from anyone? Thank you. Would you move on to the university's code of conduct?
Okay, in the interest of time, just the overview. As part of the audit committee charter, we bring these policies just to the board every other year for review, but also just a reminder that the policies exist. The first policy is the conflict of interest for the board itself. The second is a conflict of interest for employees. And then finally, the finance function itself has its own code of ethics. There have been no changes that were recommended. This is just presented as an information item. There are some issues with the policy on conflict of interest, the employee conduct, that we'll be taking a look at over the next, certainly over the next year, to raise or at least address some issues that have been raised in some audits that need some attention. But we don't have any recommendations or changes proposed at this time.
Any questions from the committee or the board? Okay, thank you. Our only action item for today is the engagement of our independent auditor and related fees. And for my own purposes, we've previously heard from the internal auditor, and now we're talking about the external auditor.
Okay, well, we're recommending for board approval that KPMG be employed to provide the audit services for FY14, the audit as of June 30th, 2014, fees of $778,059 plus expenses not to exceed $68,577. Just some context, this is the 5th year of the second 5-year engagement agreement with KPMG. We're under a current pricing structure, just as background, in which in fiscal year 10, KPMG cut their fee by 2%. They held it flat in fiscal year 11, and then we had agreed to 3% increases in 12, 13, and 14. So it was part of an overall 5-year pricing plan. We're in the 5th year of that right now. An issue secondary to this, beyond this, is the question of continuing audit services after this audit. We don't need to make decisions on that today, but we do need to have the board engage KPMG for this year's audit.
At what point will you bring the question to us about the next pricing agreement?
We have to make a decision. I mean, the board would need to make a decision by April in terms of whether we would go out for bid or negotiate with KPMG for an extended period of time. I think our recommendation would be preliminarily that at least for 1 year, we would recommend extending KPMG's services largely because of the turnover in the finance function throughout, not just at the system, but at the campuses. May not be the most opportune time to change auditors, but that certainly, we can do that. But we would need to decide by April in order to start an RFP process, if that's what the board chose to do.
Okay. Thank you. So the action item today is to employ KPMG to provide audit services under their current pricing agreement for fiscal year through June 30, 2014, for a fee of $77,700. Please, thank you. Would you do that for me?
It's in the motion.
Okay. Is there a motion from the committee?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, second.
Second.
Cindy, please call the roll.
Curator Bradley?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Ponder?
Yes.
Okay, all committee votes in favor.
Do I, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend to the full board that we employ KPMG for another year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please call the roll, Cindy.
Curator Bradley?
Yes.
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Downing?
Yes.
Curator Good?
Aye.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Ponder?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
I'm done, so can I have a motion to adjourn the audit committee meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Curator Bradley?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Ponder?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Given the lateness of the hour, the chair in his discretion has decided we will break for lunch now and then reconvene our compensation committee after lunch and move forward with the agenda after lunch.